Chapter 1339. Even further away from Azeroth, an interstellar battleship was quietly lurking in the asteroid zone. This was the extreme position to monitor planet Azeroth. What's up with the four lizards? Same old. The red and blue auras are still exaggerated. The bronze and green auras are hidden. These four lizards are really calm. Their home is about to be destroyed. Should we add another wave of attacks? Bullsh *T. Whoever wants to go can go. Without receiving Lord Kill Jaden's order, I won't let my brothers go for nothing. The words of these two Void Lords also represented the thoughts of many lords of the Burning Legion. That's right, as long as they died outside the twisting void, they could theoretically revive infinitely. This was on the premise that their souls could run back. For demons with almost infinite lifespans, there was the great achievement of the guy whose name was Taboo blowing up the twisting void fortress 10,000 years ago. There was also Mount Hyjal in Azeroth, where Archimonde died. Not only were they afraid of death, but they were also afraid of reviving. This was because reviving would inevitably cause damage to the soul. It was fine once or twice, but if they revived too many times, the damage to the soul would naturally be severe, which would bring about a decline in strength. This was often how Void Lords were replaced. Now, other than the most belligerent Abyss Lords and Doom Guards, many Demon Lords were a little hesitant. No one would have thought that Duque had actually calculated the frequency of the Burning Legion's attacks and played a trick right under their noses. Whether it was Krasis or Sapphiron, as the capable subordinates of their boss, their auras were of the same origin. What Duque needed to do was to increase the elemental waves that they emitted. Alexstrasza was a nature element, and Malygos was mainly a frost element. After connecting to the magic net, they were about the same when observed from afar. Duque gambled that the Burning Legion spies could not go deep into the void fortress that the Titans had left for the dragons, and could only observe from afar. If he could not deceive the Burning Legion, Duque would fulfill his promise and immediately send the four back to the void battlefield. This was why the four Dragon Kings had the time to come to the underground cave to be thugs. In order not to scare Thun, Duque also asked them to suppress their strength and enter in human form. Alright, before giving Thun a surprise, I'll surprise my own people first. As they went deeper into the cave, everyone could clearly feel that the evil aura was increasing endlessly. A large number of tentacles drilled everywhere. Everyone could vaguely sense that the tentacles seemed to feel the pulse of the earth while injecting venom-like substances into every corner of the earth, even deep into the planet Azeroth. When the venom decayed everything, it would suck it back and use it as nutrients for its growth. He suddenly understood why Titan had beaten up the four great ancient gods back then and sealed them. If the Cursed Land's Gate of Darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption, causing everything to wither and all life to be extinguished, then the Cursed Land's Gate of Darkness was the most straightforward form of absorption. Then what Thun did was the darkest corruption and the most brutal plunder. Speed up. Under Duque's command, everyone suddenly found that the tentacles no longer drilled into the ground, sides, and ceiling of the passage. This was because all the tentacles had been directly mobilized by Duque to form magic and directly attacked from outside the walls. In the absence of interference, everyone could directly use the crystal to summon the insect mounts. Four-legged insects, fast and stable, it would be strange if they could. For N-shaped legs full of spikes, any girl would have goosebumps at the sight of it. However, in the desert area, there was no mount faster than this thing. These insects the size of small cars were summoned, and whether they were willing or forced, they could only obediently follow the orders of the crystal that contained their emperor's will and bitterly move towards the more dangerous depths at high speed. From the outside, Thun's nest was a huge ring-shaped building. Next to the not-so-exaggerated gate, Duque gave one last reminder: remember, the key is to disperse the formation. As long as we stand together, we will be infinitely connected by the rays of the eyeballs, and then we will all be wiped out. We, F***CK. Duque couldn't help but curse, dog, sh*T, that's right. The self-centered Malygos, who was pretending to be the best in the world, actually didn't listen to Duque and rushed in first. As the ancestor of Azeroth magic, Malygos boasted of being the king of magic. Needless to say, he didn't have a good attitude towards Duque. Even though Duque had deliberately avoided using his name when he advanced to become a demigod, and the range of the weave's usage avoided the dragons and fixed it on mortal races like humans, night elves, blood elves, and dwarves, it still didn't stop Malygos from being unhappy with Duque. Malygos' authority in magic had always been limited to the blue dragon race. This old man felt that everyone in the world who played magic had to listen to him. Perhaps in his heart, Duque was still the little morning star wizard he had met all those years ago, needing to kneel down and worship him. He could ignore all of Duque's achievements and all of Duque's efforts to protect this world. If you're so awesome, then fight Thun alone if you can. Duque scolded. He really scolded out loud. He had spent so much effort to use the time difference to pull 6 demigods to surround Thun. Did he think it was easy? The experts of the Alliance tribe were dumbfounded. The 3 dragon kings were flustered and exasperated. Wait! Are you crazy? Alexstrasza, who had changed her name to Legolas, almost wanted to slap Malygos and drag him back. Humph. Malygos snorted coldly, completely ignoring the Red Dragon Queen. At this moment, Thun, who was in the middle of the huge circular hall in the darkness, slowly revealed its disgusting appearance. At first glance, it looked a bit like an incense burner. Its fat, brown body was full of thorn-like barbs. It was covered with dark purple eyes and yellow-black pupils that people with trypophobia most did not want to see. On the body with the base of the incense burner, there were more than 10 hooks that curved towards the sky. In the middle, there was an even larger eyeball. This huge eyeball with a diameter of at least 7 stories slowly opened after sensing the arrival of Malygos in human form. It was hard to tell whether it was ridicule or sarcasm. Thun's voice directly crossed the void and turned into mental power that entered the minds of every challenger. However, the voice was clearly directed at Malygos. It was not like a declaration. It was more like a hint or even a curse. Malygos. Death is not far from you. You will die. You will betray your siblings. You will be abandoned by your siblings. You are too weak. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 1340. He didn't know if the words, brother, sister, and friend, in the Draconic language were synonymous, or if that was the original meaning. Thun's words were like a powerful mental suggestion, but the one who was most affected was Duque, the transmigrator. Duque clearly remembered what happened to Malygos later. In the game version of Wrath of the Lich King, Malygos believed that the world had been corrupted by creatures that used magic indiscriminately. He decided to destroy all creatures that used magic and even magic-related creatures. Obviously, Duque was now on the top blacklist of creatures that used magic indiscriminately. If this went on, there was no need for original history or so-called prophecies. Just inference alone was enough to know that Duque and Malygos would fight. Although Duque didn't like Malygos, he really didn't want Malygos to die. The death of one more dragon aspect would weaken planet Azeroth's protective array by 20%. Even if a new dragon aspect was chosen, it would be impossible to fill the original gap. This was like changing to a small caliber screw. It could be inserted, but it definitely wouldn't fit. In the original history, the later dragon aspects became weaker and weaker. This was an indisputable fact. It wasn't until Nozdormu and his future darkened self perished together that the planet Azeroth's protective array was finally broken. Only then did the Burning Legion fully invade. Duque felt a headache coming on. However, he didn't have the time to care about things that happened so long ago. According to history, it would be many years before Malygos's brain went crazy. Theoretically, Thun wasn't Enzos, who was good at hypnosis and brainwashing. It should be fine, should be. On the other side, Malygos was furious. No more dragon aspects will betray their brothers and sisters, traitors will be nailed to the pillar of shame forever. Thun. Don't think that just because you're a true god you have the right to sow discord between me and my brothers and sisters. The only thing worthy of you is a deeper destruction." In response to his angry roar, Malygos transformed. A pair of beautiful blue wings shot out from his back, and his limbs instantly turned into ferocious, sharp claws. Ice blue, fine, and solid scales covered them. The expensive epic-ranked mage robe was instantly frozen and shattered into pieces of ice, revealing the body of a giant dragon with a tail growing out of its butt. In the blink of an eye, the arrogant mage had completely taken on the form of a dragon. Although his size seemed to be comparable to Sea Thun's, anyone could feel that their auras were not on the same level. Even so, it was enough to astonish all the experts of the tribe. Everything was explained. No wonder Duque did not immediately take advantage of Sea Thun's incomplete recovery after defeating the twin emperors and directly lead the alliance's powerhouses to march. It was no wonder that after the horde killed Audrey the Scarless, they did not immediately gather the horde to attack. Instead, they were considerate enough to give them a full 3 days of precious rest time. It turned out that everything was just in passing. Duque had been waiting for the 4 dragon aspects from the beginning to the end. Malygos transformed, and the other 3 dragon aspects also transformed at the same time. 3 long, distant roars seemed to come from the War of the Masters 25,000 years ago. The battle where the titans of the pantheon beat up the ancient gods was replayed today. Although the leader was no longer Sargeras, the Titan warrior, and he was not fighting against a group of powerful elemental lords like Ragnaros or several ancient gods who were in perfect condition, the 4 dragon kings appeared together to besiege the half-crippled Sea Thun. This scene, which should have only existed in epics and legends, was happening in front of a crowd of mortals. It was hard to tell if it was excitement, ecstasy, or some other emotion. Strong emotional fluctuations, accompanied by the fierce vibrations of the surrounding elements, were transmitted to the depths of every mortal's heart. Everyone's hearts expanded and contracted greatly because of the excessive stimulation. Blood was strongly pumped from the heart, rushing to every corner of the body. The eyes of the weak gradually turned pitch black, and they greedily inhaled the slightly turbid air. The vision of the strong was filled with brilliance. They saw the agitation of the elements and the exaggerated confrontation. More importantly, they saw the boundary between mortals and gods. The absolute boundary that once felt unreachable did not seem so difficult to break through. As soon as the 4 dragons went up, the surrounding elements were instantly sucked dry. Malygos directly summoned an ice dragon made of pure frost elements. It pounced over with its fangs and claws bared, and it bit down. The elemental dragon succeeded, but it also failed. Its bloody mouth bit off a large piece of Sea Thun's flesh, and only a large gap could be seen in the lower body of the incense burner. But before Malygos could be happy for half a second, the entire elemental dragon was stabbed by a large tentacle that rose from the ground into the sky. The sky was filled with icicles, and even Sea Thun's body was not frozen much. Sea Thun's lower body, which was brown with a little pink, began to squirm disgustingly. In everyone's vision, Sea Thun's entire body had grown larger, except for the large eyeball above. It was proliferating. Roar! Nozdorma used sand to form a dragon's body and fiercely swung Sea Thun's tail. But halfway through, the tail was also blocked by a large tentacle that appeared out of thin air. Its tail was broken, and the sand that exploded had a great deal to do with time. This was because all the parts of Sea Thun that were hit by the tail fragments began to wither. Alexstrasza was the most direct. She fiercely spat out dragon's breath as soon as she went up. However, her dragon's breath was immediately offset by a red blazing light that was as thick as a house that shot out from Sea Thun's bulging eyeball. The fierce battle between the Red Dragon Queen and the ancient god caused the most terrifying law shock. It was reasonable to say that this terrifying collision of power was enough to easily destroy a fortress and cause several blocks to collapse in the destructive shock wave. However, everyone only felt a moment of trance. The master of the Emerald Dream, the Green Dragon Queen Isera, made her move. With the strange and gentle sound of the wind, a green light spread further with the wind. The majestic walls of the underground palace of the Temple of Ankh-Kiraj silently turned into powder and sank into the hard stone ground under their feet. The battlefield that appeared in front of the mortals was a huge hemispherical hole with a radius of at least a kilometer. Is this the Emerald Dream? Tyrant showed a look of admiration. No. Isera's voice sounded in the minds of the mortals. No matter how arrogant I am, I would not dare to pull an evil ancient god into the Emerald Dream. I just used my natural power to forcibly change the surrounding landscape to make this place more suitable for dragons and mortals to fight. Chapter 1341. The power of a demigod was enough to move mountains and fill seas. The ground that had just been flattened, with a crash, the solid granite stones stacked up layer by layer like broken waves. The ground was covered with shocking cracks, as if it had experienced a terrible earthquake. At this time, the heroes were a little hesitant. Duque shouted, "What are you waiting for? Enter according to the prearranged formation." Others might not know, but Duque knew best. The ancient god Thun was disgusting not because of his powerful single-target attacks, but because of the endless situation. On the surface, the four dragon kings attacked together, and the mortals felt like they were just bystanders, but in reality, they were not. Thun was a terrifying existence that could destroy the world by himself. Not only did his tentacles affect the city, but they also greatly interfered with the movements of the four dragon kings. Whoosh! There was a loud noise, and a giant claw tentacle appeared. The size of this enormous tentacle was no different from that of a 5-story tower. In front of this level of tentacle, the scales and dragon skin that the dragon kings were so proud of were no different from the armor of mortals. As long as it was hit, it would definitely be pierced and torn apart. A tentacle easily penetrated Nozdormu's thigh, and the dragon leg that weighed several tons suddenly exploded. If Nozdormu was a giant dragon with flesh and blood, he would probably have been seriously injured. Roar! The Time Dragon King roared angrily, and his thick tail swept over violently. However, the tail that weighed hundreds of tons did not break the tentacle. Instead, after a few trembles, the giant claw tentacle drilled back into the ground. When had the Bronze Dragon King ever suffered such a big loss? He wanted to drill into the ground and settle the score with that tentacle. Nozdormu! Alexstrasza stopped him. Nozdormu could only resentfully restore his dragon leg. It was true that he was a giant dragon made of sand, but it took time and energy to rebuild his body. It was obvious that the attacks of the four dragon kings had slowed down. The next moment, the tentacle that had just caused trouble came out again. This time, it changed its target to Isera, who had not used close combat. Although Isera had the least offensive moves among the four dragon kings, and did not dare to use the power of dreams to attack Thun, her existence was the key. Because Thun's attack was mainly a wide-area nature attack, Isera's nature resistance aura could effectively reduce more than 80% of the damage. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Isera's existence was the key. Just as Isera, who was casting a healing spell, discovered that the giant claw had suddenly popped out from the right side of her dragon abdomen, a large, silver-colored dwarf rushed over and viciously struck the tip of the giant claw with a whirlwind hammer. It could not be said to be a tit-for-tat, as the Shorty King had used the avatar descending to increase his size by at least 5 times, but the Fire Lord hammer had increased by 10 times. When the god equipment giant hammer, which was constructed from pure fire elements, turned from an elemental form into a solid form, and was then swung around by Magni's inhumanly terrifying strength with a hint of gold within the black hammer before smashing it down viciously, the visual stimulation that was filled with shock left every single mortal speechless. Bang! An earth-shattering explosion was accompanied by a flaming shockwave that splattered in all directions. Even though the size and the scene were completely different, the people present felt as if they were watching a child playing with a hammer to hit a gopher. With one strike of the hammer, a giant claw tentacle that should have been taken down by a dozen people had actually been charred black. Queen Sylvanas merely added an arrow, and the giant tentacle was finished. It was like a leaking balloon, slanted and flattened on the ground. Without giving anyone the time to catch their breath, Thun in this life was obviously more violent. Squeak! There was a strange sound, and everyone felt the ground shake violently. This guy wants to pull us underground. Nozdormu was shocked and angry, and had no choice but to attack angrily. No one knew what exactly happened. They only saw that the ground that was originally starting to collapse seemed to have been rewound, and the cracked areas were perfectly repaired. In any case, another Dragon King was being held back. As Alexstrasza dug out a large piece of Sea Thun's body with a slap, she shouted at Duque, "Help us clean up those troublesome things." In addition to the giant claw tentacles, there were also tentacles with huge eyeballs. These things called the giant eye tentacles were also deadly weapons. If the team was too crowded, the mind whip shot out from the eyeballs would be like a chain of lightning, bouncing and spreading almost infinitely throughout the team. The only way to deal with these things was to use powerful long-range attacks. Ha! The Empress Dowager waved Ashbringer, and the brilliant golden light turned into a crescent moon. It swept across the battlefield and cut the eyeball tentacle in half at the root. This was not the end. The hideous eyeballs were still twitching violently on the ground, randomly pouring out deadly rays in all directions. Humph! The masters snorted in all directions at the same time. Queen Sylvanas arrow. Gianna's ice. Sun King's fire. Woking spear. The 4 attacks almost hit the giant eye tentacle at the same time, blowing it up in one breath. At the same time, Duque's performance was a little quiet. He did not look like a demigod at all. In the eyes of others, his performance was similar to that of other mortals. At most, he would play backstab, suddenly flash behind a giant eye tentacle, and give it a hard blow with the spiral sword. Similarly, Onyxia, who had transformed into Countess Katrana, also behaved like a peak radiant moon archmage, extremely low-key. What was Duque doing? Only the dragons knew. In the void, the Burning Legion suddenly received a secret report. Your source said that the 4 big lizards actually abandoned the void battlefield and ran to deal with the rioting ancient god Sea Thun. The Void Lord Ambassador Helmer, who used to be a dread guard, muttered. Auras walked out of the shadows and said, "There is an 80% chance that the information is accurate. The Sleeping Dragon Temple has a close relationship with the leader of the Alliance, Duke Marcus. If it wasn't for us dragging the Sleeping Dragon Temple's power in the void, those big lizards would have already arrived at the Silithus battlefield." Queen Sailoras said, "This is an opportunity. If we can break through the Sleeping Dragon Temple's defense line, it will definitely be a great achievement." Ambassador Helmer's face turned cold. "It's me, not we." He did not give the twins a good look. Ever since the twins made a mistake 10,000 years ago, their status was not as good as before. Now, in the eyes of other lords, they were just running errands and playing tricks. They could not represent Commander Kill, Jaden. "Yes, it's you, the great Ambassador Helmer." The twins tactfully lowered their heads. Chapter 1342. Ambassador Helmer looked up slowly. "I did not receive Lord Kill, Jaden's order to attack, so it's up to me whether or not to believe the so-called accurate intelligence." "Yes, that's right." The Gemini lowered her head even more. Their plan was indeed very well thought out. If Helmer was successfully incited and foolishly went to attack, it would be a success. Of course, it would be due to their accurate intelligence. If they failed, it would be Helmer who sent out the troops without permission. The demons of the Burning Legion could run as many corpses as they wanted. To be honest, no matter how many died, the leader of the demon army would not mind. The point was, to send in the demons, they had to sacrifice the void warships. The demons were unlimited, but the warships were limited. It was not a lack of resources. After all, Chief Sa had taken almost all the warships of the Pantheon. It was a pity that he did not get the production line for the void warships. So while there were many warships, one destroyed meant one less. Helmer was not a simple-minded abyssal lord. Kill, Jaden had painstakingly arranged for Helmer to lead the harassment war against Azeroth because he valued his intelligence. As a Dread Guardian, he had the appearance of an Apocalypse Guard, except that his entire body was dark green, and he had 2 huge bat wings. Because of the infusion of dark energy, he seemed to have a cold aura. He suddenly threw out a poisonous bait. Since you believe in this intelligence, then you can borrow some void warships from me, and the demon army can also take some. In exchange, you must give me sufficient collateral. The Eridar Gemini was first overjoyed, then shocked. Telepathically connected, they looked at each other and quickly made a decision: go for it. They had lost Jaden's trust for a long time. In the Burning Legion, where power struggles were so severe, it was already a miracle that they could survive until now. Countless male lords wanted to take them back as playthings or slaves, and countless female demons wanted to step on their corpses to rise, such as Mother Sharas of the Sylvanas. They had absolutely accurate intelligence that confirmed that the 4 Dragon Kings were now fighting Thun in the depths of the Kiraj Temple. So they decisively bet a large number of soul stones. Those were high-quality souls they had collected from different planets and worlds over the past 10,000 years. While they did not bet everything, it was definitely 70 to 80% of their savings. They had no choice but to bet. In terms of strength, they were far superior to Helmer, but they did not have the power. This was the difference. Looking at the Eridar Gemini's collateral, Ambassador Helmer smiled. With so much, even if Jaden were to question him, he would be able to answer to him. You can take away 2 void battleships, 10 void cruisers, 30 destroyers, and the corresponding demon army. The time limit is 10 Azeroth days. If the damage exceeds 50%, the authorization will be automatically revoked. Just as she was about to speak, she was stopped by Queen Sololas. That's right, the collateral they provided was more than enough to borrow twice their strength. But the military power was in Helmer's hands. The Eridar twins suddenly closed their eyes at the same time. Only the 2 of them could see the intense battle that was happening at the same time in another dimension. Alexstrasza bravely charged in front, tearing off pieces of Thun's flesh. Maligos used his comprehensive and violent magic to suppress Thun's regeneration. Nozdormu ruthlessly caused Thun's overgrown cells to age and die prematurely. Isra used a powerful natural aura to defend against Thun's attacks. This scene, this undeceiving elemental and divine power undulations were all clearly transmitted to the Gemini's senses through a certain observing eye. No problem. So be it. The Gemini quickly made a decision. Speed was the most important thing in war. Half an hour later, a small Burning Legion fleet with a long tail of green flames was teleported from the distant side of the galaxy to the void battlefield outside of Azeroth's atmosphere in one go. Don't be afraid. The Dragon Slumber Temple's 4 dragon aspects are not here. The ones left here are just some ancient dragons. Ancient dragons could basically fight to a draw with a Void Lord at the beginning stage. The Eridar Gemini were called intermediate, but they were demoted due to their defeat in the distorted void 10,000 years ago. In terms of strength, the 2 sisters were among the top in the Burning Legion. As long as the 4 Dragon Kings were not around, no dragon was a match for the 2 sisters. The invasion of the evil demons naturally triggered the alarm of the Void Fortress left behind by the Titans to guard Azeroth. Almost at the same time, the figures of the 4 dragon aspects paused for a moment. They really came. Alexstrasza was not angry, but smiled instead. What's wrong? Sar, who was busy beating up the eyeball tentacles, suddenly turned his head. Nothing much. There really are evil demons that came to attack the void battlefield, Isra replied calmly. Then what should they do? Were the dragon aspects going to give up on this battlefield and run back immediately? Be it the Alliance or the Horde, every powerhouse knew the duty of the dragon aspects. They had always been the top priority when it came to defending against the Burning Legion. You guys. Just as Magni was about to ask. A shocking change occurred. Duque, who had been doing nothing all this while, flashed and ran behind a forgotten archmage, stabbing him with his sword without saying a word. The golden sword that looked like a spiral nail easily pierced through the chest of the former Silver Moon Council member. The surging divine power caused indescribable pain to the Great Lich's soul. The bystanders only saw that the Great Lich was in so much pain that his entire body almost arched backwards. The upper and lower parts of his dry lips were cracked to the maximum, revealing teeth that were slightly black. Duke Marcus. What are you doing? The most furious one was naturally the Sun King. He suddenly turned his golden staff and aimed it at Duque. Not just Tsar and the other Horde powerhouses, even the heroes of the Alliance were stunned. What was Duque doing? Was he going to break off relations with the Horde and kill them all in one go? Was he going to challenge the true god Thun? Shock, disbelief, suspicion, fear, and all kinds of emotions intertwined among the mortals. In the next instant, everyone understood the answer. An eyeball suddenly popped out of the eye socket of the great lich who had been stabbed in the back. It was not an ordinary eyeball that the lich had preserved using shadow magic. It was an observer's eye that belonged to the Burning Legion. In less than half a second after the eyeball popped out, it had already expanded to the size of a fist. The purple veins and whiskers around the eyeball also proved this fact. Holy light above, we're being watched. Benedictus exclaimed. Chapter 1343. That's right, all the scenes of the battle just now had obviously been transmitted to the Burning Legion through the traitor's specially replaced eyeball. Sal felt a wave of anger and humiliation. He had gone against the majority's opinion and forcibly brought the Forsaken into the tribe. He had valued the combat power of the Forsaken, but ultimately, it was because of the situation. He knew very well that the tribe's greatest enemy was not the Alliance. The greatest enemies ranked above the Alliance were Thun, the damned ancient god, and the Burning Legion. He would never forget what the Burning Legion had done on the Kalimdor continent. Half of Grey Valley, the entire Fellwood Forest, had been destroyed by the Burning Legion. Even with the restrictions of high-ranking commanders, there were still demons who ran away or hid in the years after the Burning Legion invaded Kalimdor, indiscriminately killing the night elves and the people of the tribe. Now, there was actually a traitor in the tribe's hero team that he should have trusted the most. How could he tolerate this? Go to hell. Traitor. Sal leaped high, and the hammer of destruction burst into blazing flames. With a leap hack that was deeply inherited from Grandpa Roar, not only did the hammer smash the observer's eye that had not escaped in time, but it also smashed the great lich's head into a rotten watermelon. Yep, a rotten watermelon. He. Mortals, no one can resist the Legion. The great lich's cold laughter echoed in the void. Stay. Anastrian could not keep his face any longer and took the initiative to attack. However, he was not a true warlock. His soul-binding technique was actually resisted by the lich. No one expected Duque to attack again. To be precise, it was the elemental emissary under Duque's command who attacked. Duque raised his hand, and the figure of the Black Witch Farina suddenly appeared beside him. She raised her hand and used a more authentic, soul capture. The great lich's soul screamed and struggled, trying to break free from the soul vortex formed by the crimson crystal in Farina's hand. The Black Witch chuckled coldly, run if you can. You betrayed Azeroth. Your will is useless. Now, after repenting, you will become Master's servant and serve Master loyally. The most glorious thing in this world is to serve Master's cause forever. Farina's entrance was a pain in the ass for the mortal experts. How did the backbone of the cursing sect, who was originally loyal to Kel Thuzad, suddenly become Duque's diehard fan? Not only was she fanatical, but she also came to fight for Duque. Everyone could imagine what would happen to this traitor if he fell into the hands of such an evil woman. Sal, give me this guy's soul. You don't have any objections, do you? Duque asked as he swatted away a tentacle. No problem. Sal was resolute and did not even look at the Sun King. The problem now is not the Alliance and the Horde, I'm fine. Duque waved his hand. Everything is going according to plan, Isra replied with a smile. Was it all part of the plan? Could it be that even the traitor among the Forsaken was part of Duque's plan? Sal, Wajin, Orgrim, and the Sun King were all shocked at the same time. Someone's changed. Duque slapped Onyxia, who was immersed in her sadistic fantasies, on the shoulder and woke her up. If there were no outsiders, Duque would even kick her on her perky and elastic butt. The formation that besieged Sea Thun suddenly changed. Alexstrasza and Malygos were still attacking fiercely. Isera's figure seemed to be exiled by the magic of the warlocks, and her whole dragon body became illusory and transparent. However, everyone could still clearly feel her natural resistance halo, which was counteracting Sea Thun's natural attribute attack. The most exaggerated one was Nozdormu, whose huge sand dragon body became slow. Although it was only a little bit, everyone could feel that this guy was already a good-for-nothing. How dare you be distracted while fighting me? Are you looking down on me? Sea Thun let out an angry roar. No. We didn't look down on you. With Duque's voice, Onyxia quickly became bigger. As the Black Dragon Princess, there was an absolute gap in strength between her and the 4 dragon aspects. As the closest in strength to the dragon aspects, she was qualified to succeed as the Earth Guardian. Even if she couldn't do as well as Nozdormu, it was not a problem for her to defend more and attack less. No matter how strong Sea Thun was, it was impossible for him to completely ignore the attack of a genuine demigod creature. Damn it, the whole cave echoed with Sea Thun's roar. In the void battlefield, the Eridar twins' faces turned green. Because just when they ordered the void battleship to release the demonic troops and spread out the formation, they suddenly felt a strong magic fluctuation. The magic turbulence that was surging enough to interfere with space was dominating the entire airspace. In the countless battles between the Burning Legion and the Dragon race, the demons knew that there were only 2 existences in the entire Dragon race who could do this. One was the Dimensional Dragon King, Nozdormu. The other was, in the Void Fortress, a dazzling icy blue light shone. The light was so bright that it was comparable to the light of the sun in an instant. A beautiful and gigantic dragon was standing at the entrance of the fortress, displaying its terrifying and oppressive figure. Malygos. I am the incarnation of magic. The arrogant voice was transmitted to the void battleship 10,000 meters away through the violent elemental fluctuation. That Malygos' body was bursting with a storm-like frost element. As soon as he appeared, he froze all the void trash at the entrance of the fortress. This, a low-level void lord of the Apocalypse Guard turned to look in the direction of the void battleship. His questioning voice reached the Eridar twins' ears. Didn't you say that the 4 dragon aspects aren't here? The Burning Legion and the Dragon race had been fighting each other for so many years and knew each other very well. Every single dragon aspect was in existence with shocking strength, and they could easily take on a high-tier Void Duke on their own. Generally speaking, at least 3 high-rank Void Overlords were needed to stall a dragon aspect. And this was under the situation where the dragon aspects did not cooperate with each other. Once all 5 dragon aspects were present, with the support of the planet's protective formation, the Burning Legion would be helpless. They could only be cannon fodder. Impossible. How could Malygos rush back in time? Alesis shouted in shock. Among all the dragon aspects, Alexstrasza and Malygos had the worst mobility. It was not easy to create a portal that allowed them to pass through. Moreover, Sea Thun would not let them go so easily. What exactly happened? Chapter 1344. There was no time to waste on Gemini's Burning Legion. In the Void Fortress, more dragons came out. In the void, a sandstorm appeared out of nowhere. Countless gravel, and even broken warship fragments began to gather together, forming a behemoth. No demon was unfamiliar with this scene, because Nozdorm appeared like this every time. The King of Space and Time could appear anywhere he wanted, unless there was a stronger force that refused him entry. In the absence of Sargeras and Archimonde, no one would be able to stop Nozdormu unless Jaden personally intervened. Queen Solora's delicate body shook violently. Alright, another Dragon King. Sea Thun didn't catch the King of Space and Time, but what about the next one? An illusory scene appeared in the void. It was a green world that shouldn't exist outside the atmosphere. A beautiful green dragon stepped out of the illusion of the Emerald Dream. Who else could it be but Isera? Gemini was so shocked that she almost bit her tongue off. 3 of the 4 dragon aspects had already appeared, and the last one couldn't wait. As the fiercest and highest-ranking dragon aspect, Alexstrasza didn't appear every time. Unless the main force of the Burning Legion arrived, she wouldn't appear. This time, they were 2 high-grade lords, and 3 of the 4 dragon aspects had already given face. No. It should be said that they were giving too much face. This face was too heavy, so heavy that they couldn't bear it at all. Our spies have been discovered. So what? Theoretically, those big lizards can't make it back. See, Thun won't let go of the prey in its nest. Gemini had to take the gamble. They were betting too heavily, so heavily that it was almost impossible to turn the tables. Moreover, it wasn't like they could retreat if they wanted to. If the opposite Dragon King was the real deal, then they wouldn't be able to leave even if they wanted to. Bet? We can only bet. Bet on who? Malygos. If Nosdorm and Isra could escape from Thun through special means, Malygos was the least likely. The massive amount of magical elements that the King of Magic carried would directly affect the stability of the Arcane School's teleportation portal, which made it extremely difficult for him to pass through the teleportation portal in battle. Dozens of void battleships opened fire, their demonic cannons gathering a huge amount of magic power. A few seconds later, hundreds of green beams of light pierced through the pitch-black sky and shot toward Malygos. The ice-blue giant dragon performed an amazing performance in the void. He flapped his magnificent wings and nimbly dodged the most powerful beam from the main cannon. As for the beam from the secondary cannon, he did not even bother to block it as he charged straight at him. He was as domineering and terrifying as ever. Under Malygos's lead, the dragons dodged the cannon fire while attacking the Burning Legion's fleet. He was close. He was close. It was getting closer and closer. The dragons didn't have very good long-range weapons, but this was limited to existences other than Malygos. He fluttered his huge wings and raised 2 terrifying starlights. It was a frosty brilliance that looked like starlight. It gorgeously went against the green cannon's light and crashed into the 2 destroyers at the front. Although the 200-meter-long destroyers made a serpentine maneuver, it was meaningless in the face of magic attacks that could still be controlled after they were launched. Poof! The white light shot in. In less than a second, the entire black destroyer turned into a large, bloated, and ugly eggplant. Then, countless white lights flowed out of the destroyer. The spots of light grew more and more intense. The next moment, the entire destroyer exploded just like that. There was no bright but fleeting explosion, no flying debris and demonic limbs, only a huge ice coffin in the shape of a sea cucumber. Just like Malygos had done for the past 10,000 years. He was as skilled as ever. He was as arrogant as he was in the past. You lied to me. The low-level Void Lords roared in unison. They were not direct subordinates of the Gemini twins. They were only willing to come out this time because the Gemini swore that the 4 Dragon Kings were not around. These low-ranking lords of the army were willing to come and try their luck. Now, not only did they fall into the trap, but the Gemini twins also fell into the trap. Nosdormu also showed his power. Dark spacetime magic that was hard to see with the naked eye attacked, easily aging the metal of the cruiser's outer shells. The demonic cannons exploded after a few shots. The other wyverns attacked, using their sharp, hard claws to squash a void cruiser like a tomato, ripping open its intestines in just a few moments and destroying it. Isra made thousands of demons fall into a dream, foolishly becoming lambs for the dragons to slaughter. This battle was more than one-sided. This was simply a one-sided beating. The Gemini twins were stunned. They had been scheming all year round and were used to being scheming, but now they were being schemed against. They could not help but laugh at themselves. Were the 2 sisters getting worse and worse? In the past, he was able to fool everyone, but now, he was being used. At this time, the smart Gemini twins had figured out many key points. Duque indeed wanted to borrow the power of the dragons, but the 4 Dragon Kings would not be at ease if the external enemies were not stable. Just taking advantage of the time difference was not enough. Duque had dug a trap for the Burning Legion to jump into. The only difference was who jumped into it. The Gemini twins, unfortunately, became the one who got hit. Even though they did not understand how Duque could make Malygos appear in two places at the same time, they were sure that before the next regular harassment battle, the dragon's void fortress would be truly empty. Unfortunately, there would be no one else who would be the Pathfinder. The Gemini twins could not even protect themselves, so how could they care about the other lords? Ha! Elisa's, did you notice that this is very similar to a certain human? It's infernal affairs, indeed. Humans don't have a lifespan of 10,000 years. With Nozdormu around, nothing is impossible. The Gemini twins fell silent. So what if they guessed correctly? Everything had nothing to do with them. Ever since the defeat in the ancient war 10,000 years ago, when the largest fortress in the Twisted Void was destroyed, they were pushed to the bottom by the angry Sargeras, and almost became the lowest existence in the army. In these 10,000 years, the army worked hard to recover, and they also tried their best to climb back up. After climbing for 10,000 years, they finally returned to this position. Who knew that they would suffer a crushing defeat again? They had already lost Jaden's trust, and the days ahead would definitely be even more difficult. Not to mention that there was no evidence to prove that Duque was the infernal affairs. Even if there was, they would not expose it. In their hearts, a new idea was born. Chapter 1345. With the support of the magic net and the cover of the illusions, Sapphiron, who was just an ancient dragon, was able to put up the numbers of a dragon aspect in the form of an elemental creature. If there was an all-star MVP election for this battle, Sapphiron would definitely be the winner. Duque and Sapphiron combined their wills and swept through the scattered demons. Because Sapphiron wasn't a real dragon, he could do many things that dragons couldn't. With a beautiful S-shaped maneuver, Duque had Sapphiron dodge a series of demonic cannons. The battleship and two destroyers in front of him was the last organized resistance. There weren't many bullets, but they couldn't stop Sapphiron's advance. Sapphiron charged forward like lightning, his blue and white figure drawing a continuous arc in the void. He didn't stop for a moment. All the cannons were like fireworks in a grand festival. They were beautiful but useless. He brushed past Sapphiron, who was disguised as Malygos, by a hair's breadth. Dozens of magic arrays with complicated blue and white patterns hovered around him like loyal guards. They kept releasing elemental beams of different colors to kill the demons that were scattered around. He wasn't just shooting in a straight line. In the void, he would slightly shake up, down, left, or right, and the beams would fly to who knows where after a certain distance. Sapphiron's concentrated attacks were like blooming chrysanthemums, full of arcs. If the demons weren't careful, they would be hit. Once mobility decreased, even the strongest demon was just a target. Don't come over. After I enter the battleship, just help me kill the other demons, Sapphiron ordered in the form of Malygos. There weren't many blue dragons in the void battlefield, but when their boss wasn't here and there were no new orders, the other three dragons would choose to follow the orders of a higher-level dragon. Everyone was just surprised that Malygos was so fierce today. First of all, the accuracy of his long-range magic had greatly increased. Then, why was he interested in these battleships that had destroyed who knew how many? As a creation of the Titans, the Burning Legion's battleship had the same structure as the one that a certain someone had boarded 10,000 years ago. If Sapphiron was a real dragon, it would not be easy for it to enter a warship that was more than 3,000 meters long. Not Sapphiron. He easily stuck to the outside of a demonic cannon, taking advantage of the gap between shots. The frost elements easily infiltrated the inside of the barrel. Originally, the battleships were piloted by the Titans and their creations, so they naturally had complete defensive measures. Unfortunately, the ones controlling the battleships were a group of crude demons. It wasn't an easy task to find someone who was willing to be a cannoneer among the irascible demons who advocated close combat but didn't have a high status. Those who could barely aim and fire their cannons were already qualified demon cannoneers. Of course, the little demon cannoneers couldn't understand what reverse charge was. When they reacted, a guy who looked exactly like Malygos in human form was already standing next to the cannon. Humph. His body was a humanoid made of frost elements, and the controller was Duque. With just a cold snort, the end of these imps had arrived. The intense collision between magic and the evil life form had caused the smell of blood to overpower the air purification ability of the warship's ventilation system. The silver-black corridor turned from colorless to colorful in an instant, drenching the surface. A faint ice shield covered Malygos from all directions without any blind spots. At the same time, a large amount of frost elements that looked like mercury surged and accompanied him. It was as if he was walking on the metal corridor of the battleship. The scene was as weird as it could get. 3 blurry dragonians slowly rose from the wave of frost. These 2 fellows, who looked like dragon men but were actually elemental creatures, guarded Malygos from both sides and behind with double-headed machetes in their hands. Therefore, if any attacker wanted to attack him directly, they could only attack from the front. A few icicles shot out, easily dispersing the shadow arrows fired by a few Eridar warlocks. When he walked into a hall, a lord of the abyss came along the spacious hall, waving a double-headed beheading sword and charging at him. However, the powerful slash suddenly froze when it was 2 meters away from Malygos. It was as if there were 2 boulders weighing thousands of kilograms, one on the left and the other on the right, pressing down on the broad blade. Malygos, who was wearing an ice-blue robe, said softly, "Scram." This enormous demon, which weighed at least 10 tons, was sent flying faster than a kite with a broken string. Is this the strength of a Dragon King Guardian? A mysterious smile appeared on Malygos' face. It's not like, guess. That's what his expression said. Since it was a disguise, it had to be done perfectly. While completing the mission, Duque did not forget to ask for some benefits. Pretending to be Malygos and showing off his might was a requirement of the mission, but at the same time, it was convenient for a certain Dragon King to take the blame. 2 words came out of Malygos' mouth lightly, "Ice seal." In the next moment, the ice elemental energy that surged out from the weave turned everything in sight into ice sculptures. The road to the bridge was now unobstructed. Malygos moved forward with his head held high. Be it the heavy gate or the complicated magic formation, nothing could stop him for even a second. All the defenses were destroyed under the impact of the violent elemental magic. He took 81 steps forward. A total of 81 traps were destroyed. When the last door fell down, Duke saw his target, the Eridar twins, just as he wished. The Gemini stared at Malygos for a full 3 seconds before sighing at the same time. "I knew it. You're not Malygos. That big blue lizard isn't as showy as you. I wasn't sure before, but now I'm completely sure. You're not Malygos. You're Duke Marcus. A newly advanced demigod who entered the divine realm as a mortal. Do you have anything else to say before you kill us?" Aureus and Queen Sailoras were convinced, but they knew that they would not be able to escape today, so they wanted to confirm it at the very last moment. Duque was not surprised that they were seen through. The Eridar Gemini were masters of disguise and working behind enemy lines. To them, his illusory disguise was clumsy. So, Duque removed the illusion and revealed a human body made of frost elements. However, the figure was exactly the same as Duque's. An elemental body, Sapphiron's soul, and Duque's will. This combination surprised even the knowledgeable Eridar Gemini. Duque smiled. "Make your choice, Gemini. Will your soul be destroyed, or will you leave behind a small hope for a comeback?" Chapter 1346. The 2 identical beautiful faces of Aurelia and Sailoras were shocked at the same time. They couldn't believe their ears. In the past 25,000 years, it had always been Eridar who incited the enemies to surrender and rebel. No one had ever dared to incite the core of the Burning Legion, the Eridar family, to betray the Burning Legion. At this moment, there were 2 junior Void Lords between Duque and Gemini. In addition, there were more than 30 demon guards and elite Eridar warlocks waiting for them. To finish off the demons, killing them was not enough. As long as their souls could return to the twisting nether, the demons could endlessly run back to their corpses. But what if their souls couldn't return? Before Gemini could react, the elemental energy around Duke suddenly surged. The high-purity ice elemental energy that was originally surrounding his body suddenly shot forward, and a silver spiral of frost shot out like lightning. The spiral energy took less than 1/100th of a second to travel more than 10 meters. When it reached the top of the demons' heads, it suddenly exploded like a bomb. The frost elementals, which were originally in a slurry, turned into a blossoming bomb. The radius of the explosion expanded by at least 100 times. The dense frost elementals penetrated everything in their path at lightning speed. Of course, the objects they were referring to were the two Void Lords and the demon guards. In the blink of an eye, the two Void Lords, including the two Void Lords, were all obliterated within the 100-yard radius of the elemental spiral. But this was only the beginning. When the frost element seemed to have expanded to its maximum range, it suddenly continued to shrink inwards until it shrunk into 9 fine spiral cones. Then, it continued to explode outwards at an even greater speed, piercing through even more demon guards. Then, they shrank and expanded again. This happened 3 times in a row. The maximum range of the frost elementals had expanded to almost the entire bridge. When the last spiral of frost elementals covered the entire bridge except for Gemini, they did not continue to spread. Instead, they gathered back and condensed into silver bullets that shot towards the demons that had yet to fall to the ground. After penetrating the ice elementals of the demons and unleashing every last bit of the spiral energy, the ice elementals finally exploded and fell back to the undulating elemental wave beneath Duque's feet. The silver-white frost reflected the lights on the bridge, making Gemini's face increasingly gloomy. All of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, from the time Duque released the frost elemental spell to the time he cleared the area, only 3 breaths had passed. A large number of demon elites, including 2 low-grade demon lords, had disappeared without a trace. The difference in strength was very obvious. Being hung up and beaten was never the scariest thing. The worst that could happen was death. Every demon firmly believed so. What was terrifying was another scene that happened in a domain that mortals couldn't reach. In his spirit vision, the souls of the devils whose bodies had been destroyed and whose souls were about to slip back into the distorted void were suddenly intercepted. A huge illusory human palm appeared out of thin air and blocked the soul gate that had opened in the distorted void. The palm had a strange suction force, emitting gravitational waves like a black hole, and captured the souls of dozens of demons, including the souls of the 2 Void Dukes. Such a skillful technique of capturing souls. This was the domain of the Eridar warlocks. However, Duque's next move was to summon a dazzling golden flame. The flame with a holy aura roasted these twisted evil souls. Except for the 2 Void Dukes, all the souls of the devils had completely disappeared from this universe. There was no resurrection. Even the devil leader in charge of the distorted void did not know why some of the devils should have died, but their remnant souls did not return to the distorted void. In the boundless universe, losing a few dozen demon souls was nothing at all. In fact, with the size of the Burning Legion, Jaden wouldn't even frown if a few high-grade demon lord souls were missing, as long as it wasn't a core mission, let alone dozens of low-grade souls. However, the Gemini were very familiar with the technique and hand gestures that Duque had used to capture the souls. It was very simple. They were the ones who had personally taught this to Duque. This scene gave the Eridar Gemini the impression that the world was collapsing. "You are Infernal Affairs?" The special name, Infernal Affairs, had too many special meanings in the Burning Legion. After the Burning Legion had wreaked havoc in the universe for 15,000 years, he was the only one who had caused irreparable damage to the Legion. One had devoted himself to the Legion, but he had ignored the Legion's sole counterattack. At the crucial moment, he had turned against the Legion and foiled Sargera's plan to descend into the world of Azeroth. He had even blown up the Legion's largest void fortress. If the name, Infernal Affairs, was combined with the name Duke Marcus, the Gemini were shocked to find that the legend of this name was still continuing. In Karazhan, he had stabbed Medivh, who had been possessed by Sargeras, to death, and kicked the Burning Legion's leader, the King of Demons, into the bottomless abyss. In the Battle of Mount Hyjal, he had also stabbed Archimonde, one of the 2 commanders of the Legion, in the chest with a magnificent backstab. They had thought that another person who could be called the enemy of the Legion had appeared in the world of Azeroth. Who knew that these 2 people were actually the same person? If it had been someone else, the Gemini might have argued. Even if they lost, they would have ruthlessly suppressed the other party's momentum. The pursuit of billions of demons. The boundless rage of the King of Demons. The hatred of the Legion that had destroyed countless stars. But, if the other party was Duque, who had killed 2 of the Legion's 3 powerhouses and blown up billions of demons, then threats and harsh words would all be a joke. In response to the Gemini's question, Duque did not answer yes or no. The air became silent for a while. The Gemini's heart skipped a beat. At times like this, the air suddenly became silent. After all, this meant trouble. The Gemini looked at each other. Queen Sailoras said, "Sir Marcus, what do you want to obtain? Even if you die and return to the distorted void, what can you obtain?" The Gemini trembled and did not answer. Duque continued, "Is it kill Jaden's final disappointment? Or the right to be the vanguard in the next battle? Oh, maybe it will even make history for Eridar's female demons." The Gemini trembled even more violently. Duque did not show them his bargaining chips, but pointed out that they did not exist. This was even more unbearable for them. For Eridar, who was famous for conspiracies and dark magic, this was the greatest humiliation and failure. As for what the Gemini thought about this, the Burning Legion never cared about the thoughts of the losers. Chapter 1347. In the original history, the Eridar twins were like fish in water until the warlocks captured them when they were rebuilding the Black Sickle Council. They were enslaved by whipping them and using demonic spells. That was how they were forced to become enemies of the army. It was not easy to make these 2 sinister and cunning female demons betray the Burning Legion, because Kill Jaden was the most vengeful. Didn't you see how Kill Jaden, commonly known as the Egg, chased after the Lich King for dozens of years? They were unwilling to betray because the price was too high. How to lower the price of the Gemini's betrayal was a skill. The staunch supporters of the royal path would choose to strengthen themselves. Duque, who had a high and low moral integrity, was already giving them face by not taking the evil path. Why would he talk about morality with the demonesses? He directly pointed out their weakness. Their repeated failures had made Kill Jaden lose patience with them. They could either become cannon fodder or rely on Duque. There was no third option. Although the Gemini's current predicament was all because of Duque, Duque threw out the bait to force the Eridar Gemini to betray them, not because he wanted to save the demonesses, but because he wanted to destroy the Burning Legion more efficiently. Of course, the ones who understood their own people the most were their own people. After being a Void Duke, Duque had a deeper understanding of the power struggle among the demons. Similarly, Duque, who was familiar with the original history, had a more accurate grasp of the Gemini's personality. "Don't worry, I won't ask you to be a meat shield or a vanguard." Duque's words struck a chord in the Gemini's heart. In history, the Black Sickle Council, which was made up of warlocks, was extremely weak. One abyssal lord had destroyed almost the entire Black Sickle Council. The shaman then discussed life with the 4 elemental lords and formed a pan-Azeroth formation to fight against the Burning Legion. The Black Sickle Council did not have much to offer. They could only capture the poor Eridar Gemini and use them as warriors to fight. Unbeknownst to them, although the Gemini had great magic attainments, they did not like to fight. The Gemini were still best at scheming. Even if they were forced to fight against a strong enemy, they would still want a strong vanguard to fight at the front. In a sense, Duque's promise that he didn't need them to fight head-on was already an enticement. So when Duque said, "I want you to provide the Burning Legion with the absolute truth every month," the twins weren't surprised at all. "Sure. No problem. Wasn't it just intelligence? Just give it to him." As long as he could get out of this predicament, Gemini's promise was so straightforward that Duque sneered out of anger. Yes, there were many types of spies, but the most famous ones were naturally double agents. Gemini had never been someone who knew what loyalty was. Perhaps, they thought that he, Duque, was still too young and easy to fool. Or, it could be said that the information they gave him was true, but the order was secretly changed. In this way, even if every piece of information was true, by changing the order to mislead, they could still come up with the opposite conclusion. If Duque wasn't an experienced transmigrator, he had watched spy movies, he would have been fooled in minutes. If this still couldn't be confirmed, Duque had been using the System Elf's lie detector to give an unqualified evaluation, which further confirmed Duque's thoughts. Duque's face darkened. It seems that you don't know me well enough and think that I'm a master who is easy to fool. Since I've chosen you as my targets, you have no room to resist. I hope that in the coming days, you can remember this. The twins were obviously shocked that their thoughts were seen through. Because conspiracies had nothing to do with power, it was purely the experience of wisdom and experience. They couldn't understand why a human who was only a few decades old would suddenly think that they had a trick up their sleeves. However, if Duque wanted to make a move, they wouldn't just sit and wait. Auras used the violent, flame scorch, to set off a sea of fire toward Duque. Sololas used the dark and obscure, shadow blade, to sneak behind Duque and attack him. The twins' tacit cooperation was really amazing. Although there were all kinds of attacks from Gemini in all directions, Duque actually didn't need to do anything. He just needed to follow his heart and point out the general direction to deal with them, and the elemental emissaries would naturally do the work for him. In front of him, the fire demon manager Majoris suddenly appeared and used an exquisite and magical unknown fire magic to surround the front half of Duque's body in a hemispherical shape. Not a single bit of the female demon's flames could splash into the defense constructed by Majoris. Instead, her flames were swallowed and became part of the fire element controlled by Majoris. Behind him, the Black Witch Farina, who suddenly appeared in front of Duque's back, didn't move her feet, and her whole body turned into a dark human figure. As soon as the shadow energy from all directions got close, the magic-constructed shape collapsed, and like moths flying into a flame, they were sucked into the beautiful and coquettish figure. Shock immediately froze on Gemini's face. They had imagined that there would be a gap between them and a demigod, but they didn't expect the gap to be so huge. In the elemental domain, they were the ones who were completely beaten up. Unless they could find a form of power that was completely different from Duque's, they had no chance of winning. Duque sneered and raised his left hand. Don't think that only Kill Jaden can control the soul and make anyone whose soul is captured suffer a fate worse than death. I know this trick too. Unlike the ever-changing and more basic elemental magic, shadow magic could be said to be Duque's cruelest trick. Since the opponent was a demon, Duque had no scruples. He sublimated the tricks from the Burning Legion and used them on Gemini. Dark energy was terrifying. The essence of dark energy was to burn the life and soul of a creature and turn it into energy. The soul shatter, which was derived from negative and crazy soul magic, inherited the cruel characteristics of the warlock magic. As long as more fire element was used as the basic fuel, it could ignite all the souls in the world. Almost instantly, Gemini's whole body was suddenly ignited. It was as if there was a black hole in her body, endlessly sucking in their souls to continue the burning of the flame. At the same time, countless small holy light spiraling swords flew out of Duque's body and flew in all directions in a magnificent and complex trajectory. Finally, they landed on Gemini and cut their bodies. This was a double torture of the soul and the body. And the third move, Mind Blast. Chapter 1348. This, Psychic Blast, was not the usual, Psychic Blast. The signature skill of the Shadow Priest would not cause too much damage to the Gemini who was good at using dark energy and shadow. The core of the Psychic Blast was the terrifying mental impact. The impact was secondary, and the private goods mixed in was the main point. In the image, Kill Jaden, with only half of his body exposed from the portal, lay dead again and again in the Sunwell Highland. The Egg Elder roared, struggled, and angrily used its signature skills. There were many skills that the Egg Elder had not used for more than 20,000 years. Through the system Genie's 3D imaging, the image was almost completed frame by frame. Then, using the blurry feeling of a certain someone traveling through time and space, the quality of the image was degraded to create a more realistic effect. The final finished product was this scene where the Burning Legion was defeated once again. In the Gemini's heart, there was a huge wave of emotions. Because of the burning of the soul and the body, the pain was unbearable, but the collapse of the faith in the heart was the biggest blow to them. As the intelligence experts of the Burning Legion, even if they were no longer in an important position, they still vaguely understood the possible next step of the Legion. After the Alliance guarded the Dark Portal, the Legion changed their target and no longer focused on attacking the Dark Portal, which had the weakest defense in Azeroth. Instead, they tried to find a way to weaken the planet's defense, and on the other hand, inspired by the ancient war 10,000 years ago, they looked for a high-intensity source of magic similar to the Well of Eternity to support a more powerful portal. Archimonde had come to Azeroth through the portal twice. Although it ended in failure, this approach had been proven to work many times. The Sunwell, which had part of the magic of the Well of Eternity, was obviously the next target of the Legion. Now that Duque had announced to them the fate of Jaden being killed in the Sunwell Highland, how could the Gemini not be shocked? In this way, was this man who had become a demigod not destined to destroy the 3 heads of the Burning Legion? If even Jaden was defeated, and if Duque came up with some strange idea and blew up the Twisted Void, then the Burning Legion would really be finished. If the Burning Legion had to choose the most likely nemesis, Duke Marcus was definitely worthy of it. Alright, now that I've displayed my wisdom and muscles, and even brought out the lethal weapon known as Fate, it's time to make a decision. Gemini suddenly discovered that the pain in her body instantly disappeared without a trace. Their limbs were all scorched black, and they lay heavily on the ground, their bodies drenched in sweat. Ignoring the weakness of their bodies, they struggled to support their arms with their elbows against the floor of the bridge so that they could look up at the demigod, an existence even more terrifying than a true god. Although Azeroth and the other true gods were strong, weren't they still beaten by Sargeras back then? There had never been anyone like Duque who could foresee the enemy. If he could foresee everything, in theory, all conspiracies would be ineffective against him. If they were still the capable subordinates of Jaden more than 10,000 years ago, they might be interested in challenging their ultimate enemy, Duque, to see if he had really expected everything. Unfortunately, things were different now, and they no longer had the confidence to do so. Gemini looked at each other and said at the same time, "You'll get the information you want." Very good. Duque raised his chin slightly and looked down at the Eridar Gemini at his feet. Send the information to the Karazhan. Use any method to send it to a certain heroic spirit. After saying that, Duque began to approach the control area of the bridge and tried to put his hand on the control panel. It's useless. Queen Saleras smiled bitterly. Do you think that after you sneaked into the Twisted Void and did so many things, the Burning Legion really didn't have any countermeasures? Duque raised his eyebrows. Alissa's continued, all battleships are installed with at least one set of countermeasures. Once the system determines that the intruder's strength is far greater than the demon on the ship, it will start the self-destruct sequence. In fact, before you attacked the bridge, the self-destruct system had already been activated, and all the important data had been destroyed. Duque was like a dog. It wasn't easy for him to come to the void, and the Dragon's Slumber Temple had even allowed him to enter the magic net. He had come to cause trouble in the name of official business, but he was actually intercepted. Why hasn't it self-destructed yet? Sargeras ordered the creation of this system to cause more damage to the enemy, and we haven't completely lost the ability to fight. However, it won't be long. Almost as soon as Saleras finished speaking, Duque's system genie began to jump with warning prompts. Warning! Warning! High energy reaction detected. The possibility of the Void battleship self-destructing is 99%. Duque's face darkened, and he snorted. Then, Duque made his move. The icy starlight was like the tip of a spiral sword, and the infinitely extending ice was an extension of the sword tip. The white light that surged out like a volcanic eruption instantly filled the entire bridge. Ah! The Gemini screamed at the same time. They could clearly feel that their souls had been frozen, and then a large piece had been ruthlessly cut out. Jaden had kept a portion of their souls in the distorted void, and now a large piece of their souls had fallen into Duque's hands. Just now, Duque had used his actions to prove that since Jaden could destroy them by igniting their souls, he could do it too. In a sense, the worst situation had occurred. They had been strapped with explosives, and there was more than one person who could press the button. From this moment onwards, they were really walking on a tightrope between a mountain of knives and a sea of fire. If they were not careful, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. Of course, Duque wasn't that kind of disgusting boss. He wanted the horse to run fast, but he didn't want the horse to eat grass. As their bodies were being destroyed, the Gemini suddenly discovered to their surprise that the amount of their souls had decreased, but their strength had increased. Before they could cheer, their bodies were pierced by the icicles. Then, their graceful bodies, along with the collapse of the ice and the explosion of the battleship, turned into dust in the universe. Elemental bodies didn't fear explosions. Duque turned back into Maligos's dragon form. After leaving the explosion range of the void battleship, he sensed the surroundings and found that the battlefield was basically clean. The adult dragons of the tricolor dragon tribe, under the leadership of the ancient dragon, surrounded the last demons that tried to resist. At this moment, Nozdormu and Isra flew over. The three demigods communicated with each other mentally. Did it work? Nozdormu asked. It should be no problem. This can at least buy us 24 hours for Azeroth. Duque nodded. That's great. Isra was a little excited. Chapter 1349. From the Burning Legion's point of view, since the Eridar Gemini had been used as cannon fodder, it proved that the 4 dragon aspects that should have been in on Courage were still in the void battlefield. So it didn't matter if they were defeated or not. After all, they had already completed their task of delaying the dragon aspects. What Duque needed to do was to make use of the time difference. At this moment, deep within the Courage Holy Temple, the fierce battle was still going on. Ha ha ha. You will all die. Those who go against my will be destroyed. From the sound of it, it sounded like a vicious villain announcing his evil declaration. However, Thun's voice revealed an inhuman coldness, as if hinting at its master's mood swings. No one could imagine how twisted the mind of an existence that had been sealed for 25,000 years would be. Ever since he lost the Battle of Dominators and was sealed, Thun had been suffering for far too long. From the unbridled existence of the Dark Empire, he had become a forgotten existence. He couldn't wait to announce his return to all the intelligent creatures in Azeroth. And the best gift for his return was naturally the strongest demigod in Azeroth. Perhaps it was because his sealed power wasn't easy to unseal. Or perhaps he simply wanted to spread fear and despair. Other than fiercely attacking the 3 demigod dragons, Thun still spent a lot of time ruthlessly torturing the mortals. Arg! A Forsaken warrior who had been a Beastman chief in his previous life was accidentally stabbed by the giant claw's tentacle. The sharp claws, coupled with the terrifying impact, easily pierced through his superior armor. Kacha! Everyone within a few meters could clearly hear the sound of that guy's spine shattering. As a skeleton warrior, his skeleton was everything to him. Now, his entire body was like those skeletons that were hung on the city gates as a warning to the public, being lifted up high. In the next second, the eyeball's tentacle moved closer, and the natural ray was injected into his mouth at almost 0 distance. The surging power of lightning rushed towards the core of his soul. In less than 2 seconds, a former chief, now a Forsaken warrior, disappeared from the world forever. Damn it! Old Howlgrom dashed over and slashed with a powerful horizontal strike. Against Thun, jumping around randomly was very likely to become a target for the tentacles of the eyeball. However, as an experienced old warrior, Grom's every move was so concise that it reached the point of returning to the basics. Looking at the space, he even had the time to make a 360-degree turn to increase the power of the axe. Pooh! The tentacles of the giant claw, which had already suffered from repeated attacks, finally exhausted the last of its life force under the axe. It collapsed to the ground like a deflated balloon, and a large amount of pus flowed out of every wound. Such a fierce battle was only a microcosm. The focus of the true battle was still the 3 dragons and 1 ancient god. Giant dragons, creatures at the top of the Azeroth food chain. Dragons were strong, but they were never invincible. When encountering creatures that were similar in size to them and were not afraid of dragon breath, the dragon's long and slender limbs became their weakness. In this hemispherical underground space with a radius of 1,000 meters, it seemed extremely vast, but for the dragons, it was still narrow and lacked space to maneuver. When Nozdormu and Isra left, Duque immersed his mind in the magic net to control his clone in the void battlefield. The battle situation became worse. Even though Thun's strength had not fully recovered, as a powerful tentacle monster ancient god, group battles were his forte. On the other side, Alexstrasza and Malygos clearly did not cooperate with Onyxia. At first, the 3 dragons simply divided the battlefield into 3 equal parts, each occupying 120 degrees. They soon realized that this did not work. The experienced Thun had long since hated attacking the Red Dragon Queen. As a life-giver, she had almost unlimited recovery ability. Onyxia, on the other hand, was different. As a demigod dragon, Onyxia's strength was on the lower end. She could not compare to the 5 dragon aspects, who were at the peak of demigod combat power. During the battle, she also encountered a problem. She needed to fight with Malygos for the control of the elements in the surrounding space. What was worse was that her control of the fire element, which she was best at, was practically fighting with Malygos' favorite ice element. The situation in front of her was a classic case of 1 + 1 = 2. And when he keenly noticed that she was seriously injured and had not fully recovered, Thun immediately focused his attacks on the Black Dragon Princess. Rumble. First, 8 giant tentacles burst out of the ground, covering Onyxia from 8 directions. She had no choice but to flap her wings and fly into the air. After all, in a competition of brute force in front of an enemy of similar size, the absolute strength of the dragons was at a disadvantage. In the next moment, more than 20 tentacles of the giant eye suddenly broke through the ceiling of the cave, and the eyeballs under the purple eyes shot out beams of light at the speed of light. The low frequency of the shots had the sharpest destructive power. Even if it was not concentrated, it was still an attack that had to be avoided. At this moment, Onyxia was shocked to find that she had been forced into a dead end. Because Thun's largest eye was staring at her without blinking. This was like hunting, where the released hound drove the prey to the hunter's gun. Not good. Onyxia flapped her wings 3 times in an attempt to use irregular flight trajectory to avoid Thun's ultimate move. The giant eye's rotation was too fast, and as a giant dragon, the target was too big. There was no way to avoid it. At this moment, everyone saw Thun's large eye bulge, and then a wide area bombardment that covered 2 football fields followed. That thick red beam of light was no less than a full-force attack from the city in the sky Dalagen. This terrifying attack from the main cannon of the stronghold looked like a solid object. It was as if Thun had taken the red laser sword from Star Wars and stabbed it directly at Onyxia. In just 1/100th of a second, it conquered the distance of 500 meters and stabbed at the Black Dragon. The only thing the Black Dragon Princess could do was breathe out her famous deep breath in an attempt to compete with energy. Unfortunately, the strength of the 2 sides was not on the same level from the beginning. The blazing dragon's breath seemed weak under Thun's main cannon, which was even hotter. Onyxia's deep breath, which gathered all of her strength, finally failed after resisting for a few hundredths of a second. The beam of light pierced through the dragon's breath and went straight in the direction from which the dragon's breath came. It went against the flow and blasted towards Onyxia's head. The rippling fire elements even set the surrounding space on fire in an instant. Onyxia was shocked. No. I don't want to die like this. If my ultimate fate is still death, then what's the point of me being a mount? Chapter 1350. Onyxia already knew that Duque was going to fight against the Burning Legion, and she only needed to hold on for a while. Who would have thought that Si Thun would be so fierce? Its attack pattern was the same as Duque had said, but the number of tentacles had increased by several times. One giant claw tentacle could easily make a mountain giant kneel, and one ray of light from the giant eye tentacle could make an ancient dragon enter a state of near death, doubting the dragon's life before it died. For a moment, Onyxia began to wonder if she had hugged the wrong person. If she had to die bitterly to be a capable mount, then she might as well have been stubborn from the start. At the last moment, just as the Black Dragon Princess began to let her imagination run wild, an angelic voice suddenly rang in her ears. Transform. That was her Duque's voice. Onyxia had never realized that her master's voice was so pleasant to the ears. Woo woo. I didn't suffer in vain after being tamed so many times. Without any hesitation, Onyxia quickly shrunk and transformed into a human. Alexstrasza, who was rushing over to help, was shocked. Onyxia's ultimate transformation spell had yet to reach maturity. Transforming into a human would certainly reduce the area of attack, but at the same time, her defense would inevitably be greatly reduced. If she was hit in her dragon form, there might still be some scraps left, but if she was hit in her human form, there would be nothing left. Immediately, the Red Dragon Queen saw the purple and blue light that appeared behind the princess at the critical moment, the light of the portal. Her heart immediately returned to her chest. This kid is finally back. Duque suddenly pulled and immediately pulled the humanoid Black Dragon out of Si Thun's main cannon's killing range. However, Duque only had time to pull her into the spatial crack before the terrifying ultra-high energy tore open the portal that Duque did not have time to close. The berserk magic power and divine power that had nowhere to vent easily caused a small-scale collapse in that part of the space. Even with a Tiche, Duque could not protect this spatial tunnel. In an extremely embarrassing situation, Duque held the staff in his left hand and pulled with his right hand, using almost all of his strength to pull the Black Dragon Princess out of the spatial tunnel. Bang! The bystanders only saw a flash before their eyes, and the black dragon that was supposed to be hit disappeared. Then, they saw Duque suddenly rolling around with the mage who had transformed into Countess Katrana. Woo! Onyxia was pinned under him in an M-shaped position. Ah! When Duque came back to his senses, his face was full of embarrassment. The dragon under him blushed and whispered, "If you want to tame a dragon, can we talk about it after defeating Si Thun?" Duque was speechless. Nozdormu and Isra entered the arena once again. The two giant dragons that tore through space were very eye-catching. Only Orgrim whispered to Thrall, "I suddenly have a good idea. If you can deal with a certain dragon king like Duque did with Onyxia." Just then, Alexstrasza suddenly showed her power and bit off a tentacle of the giant eye that had reached over to seek death. In the next second, because the red dragon wanted to expel Si Thun's evil divine power, it used the power of life to evaporate the foreign substance in its mouth, causing the dragon's mouth to overflow with thick mist. Looking at the bloody mouth that was flowing with blood and Si Thun's pus, Thrall's face darkened. He shook his head like a rattle and refused to do anything. Sigh. It had to be said that there was something called talent. Humans' talent in making friends was not to be underestimated. Focusing his attention back, Duque suddenly found that Si Thun was far more difficult to deal with than he had thought. In Warcraft, there were so many versions, and there were so many bosses that people almost couldn't remember their names. There were not many that could be branded in the minds of players and make countless players cry. Si Thun was definitely one of the best. Duque didn't remember if Si Thun was ranked first, but he was definitely in the top 3. In the earliest version of the game, Si Thun was simply unbeatable. No guild had any way to deal with it. Now, fate seemed to be repeating this history that would torment people to madness. The 4 dragon aspects attacked together, but Si Thun was not at a disadvantage at all. So what if his body was injured? Its ability to recover seemed to be endless. Its body could be regenerated if it was bitten off, and its tentacles could also be regenerated if they were broken. Everyone even had the illusion that they were not fighting against a powerful monster, but rather planet Azeroth itself. No matter how much damage they dealt to Seath Thun, it could be replenished with energy from the planet and regenerate indefinitely. The only good news now was that the void battlefield had been settled. The 4 dragon aspects could now fight with all their might. At the same time, Duque also made a move. Don't fight with me for the control of the elements. Seeing that Duque was about to attack, Malygos warned Duque fiercely. He. A single sentence of, dragon that angers me will be in danger. For a moment, a scene appeared in Duque's mind. In Stormwind City's King's Valley, the hanging dragon head had turned into the blue head of Malygos. F***CK. Malygos, you claim to be the king of magic, but what are you doing now? A wide area cone of ice was sent over, and 70% of the magic power was in the air, more than 20% was resisted by Seath Thun, and less than 10% caused actual damage. Duque rolled his eyes. That's right. Malygos considered himself the world's strongest ruler of magic, and in terms of magic power output, he was indeed above Duque. If Duque's magic power output per unit of time was compared to a train with a total load of thousands of tons, then Malygos was at least a cargo ship with a load of hundreds of thousands of tons. But it was precisely because of the difference in magic power demand that it seemed that Malygos' magic damage was higher. The dragon aspects didn't have a system elf, so it was impossible to calculate that in terms of magic power, Duque's damage was higher. Moreover, the dragon aspects were all siblings, so they worked better together. Okay, for Alexstrasza's sake, I'll hold it in. Duque was a demigod, so of course he couldn't just be a bystander. Didn't he see that after Onyxia got up, she turned back into her dragon form and changed to cleaning the tentacles at the edge of the underground cave? A thought popped up in Duque's mind. He acted on it. All of a sudden, a huge illusory three-dimensional magic network formed under Duque's feet. It was like a spider's web, as dense as a hedgehog's. 6 types of elemental light bloomed at the same time. Malygos turned his dragon head and almost wanted to curse, but he suddenly realized that Duque didn't occupy the magic he needed. The magic that Duque used came from different corners of the elemental domain. The elemental world was very vast, and as a pure dimensional elemental world, not to mention a demigod, even a dozen true gods couldn't instantly use up the power of an elemental world. Chapter 1351. For the sake of convenience, the point closest to Azeroth was usually used to open the passage to the elemental realm. Because there was magic flowing all year round, those points were also the easiest. Now that Duque had avoided these magic absorption points, Malygos naturally lost the right to scold Duque. Humph. With a cold snort, the Blue Dragon King turned to focus on attacking Seath Thun. Groups of magic elements gathered on the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. They quickly condensed into something like a dark cloud, and then, accompanied by a thunderous sound, a sudden hail poured down. They constantly combined with each other in the air, forming a sharp existence like a sharp sword. Almost instantly, they pierced through the tentacle forest that had just risen. The hail was endless, and as the elemental group expanded, it continued to extend in all directions. Dozens of ice prisms the size of ballistae pierced through the tentacles of the eyeball, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. Seath Thun's natural lightning magic and ice elements in the purple eyeball clashed fiercely, causing an even bigger explosion. The tentacle limbs that were blown away fell on the heads of the people around them like a landslide. These corrosive broken limbs were definitely not good things. For a moment, there was a lot of screams, and the allied healers were immediately busy. Kalia had improved a lot. In this situation, she did not chant a long and stinky incantation to activate a large area of effect, prayer of healing. Instead, she quickly cast, Holy Word, Shield, on the unlucky ones in the center. A translucent shield protected them from further damage caused by the sputtering pus. When the 7 guys all had shields, it was just in time for the Holy Knights to quickly heal them with Holy Light Flash. The chain of healing could be said to be perfect. Every unlucky guy cast a grateful look at Kalia. Seeing that Malygos didn't care about the life and death of mortal heroes, Duque was even more certain of his thoughts. Beside him, 6 elemental creatures of different forms emerged. They formed an even larger composite magic array and chanted loudly. The rhythmic incantation gathered 6 invisible forces in the air, which eventually converged on Duque. Not only did the sea Thun's tentacles around Duque bounce back as if they were struck by lightning, even the nearby air pressure dropped a bit. The magical elements summoned by Malygos in the air suddenly paused, and then quickly dissipated as if blown away by a strong wind. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. On the ground, the violent wind that was stirred up out of nowhere carried the scattered gravel and spun into the air. They gathered together in a frenzy, forming a huge sand tornado, surrounding Duque like the most loyal guards. In the blink of an eye, the massive magic array beneath Duque's feet revealed the shadows of weapons that were suspended in midair at a perpendicular angle to the ground. This is Dark Strike, Wild Blade, Spider Devil Spike, Undefeatable Will. Countless weapons hung in the air, and many people recognized these epic weapons from places such as the Molten Core, Blackwing's Nest, Naxxramas, and Mount Hyjal. No one knew what Duke was trying to do by summoning the projections of these weapons. Even more so, no one understood why huge wheels appeared around Duke's body. They only heard, Duque's incantation sounded, "I am an illusory man. The dream is the body, the will is the blood. Magic is the sky, glory is all." Peaking at fate, traversing the past and the present. Through countless battlefields, never once defeated. Unaware of life. Fearless of death. I have never been defeated. I have never been understood. Standing at the peak of time and space, intoxicated in victory. Past lives have never had meaning. This life is only born to protect. Therefore, I hereby declare. Wheel of Victory never stops. With the incantation, more weapons were constructed in the magic circle, and they began to turn from illusory to real. First, the translucent dotted lines became real outlines, then the materials used to construct the weapons were restored, the magic circle sealed in the weapons by skilled craftsmen when the weapons were cast was restored, the corresponding energy was injected, and finally, the age of the weapons was restored. At first, there were 10, 20, then 100, 1,000, countless weapons formed an enormous wheel, spinning crazily, just like the wheel of history, rolling forward, unstoppable. The wheel rolled forward, crushing anything that belonged to Sea Thun. At this moment, the heroes felt that a string in their hearts was faintly touched. Many figures and things appeared in front of them, as if they were seeing the shocking battles that Duque had experienced under his leadership. This was not like a historical drama made up by bards, but an illusion that really existed in history. The power that Duque had at this time was based on the chain of victories piled up. And Duque seemed to be pushing the wheel of fate extremely smoothly, faster and faster. Only in this way could all resistance be crushed. Sea Thun's tentacles, which had annoyed the 4 dragon aspects, were almost instantly destroyed as soon as they appeared. A smaller eyeball tentacle. Obsidian blade, had long been hungry and thirsty, and with a slash, the weapon and the tentacle were destroyed in an instant. A smaller claw tentacle. Claw of lava rage, went up and tore it apart. Giant eye tentacle. 3 hands of magic simultaneously used, counterspell, instantly stirring up the elements, enough to make the eyeball tentacle choke back the whip magic like it was constipated. The only problem was the giant claw tentacle. Even though it was like a torrential rain pouring down, nailing more epic-grade weapons fiercely, this powerful tentacle still whipped and attacked all the targets it could hit regardless. However, the fact that Duque could flatten so many annoying tentacles in one breath not only shocked the mortal heroes, but even the 4 dragon aspects were surprised. Suddenly, everyone only saw a blur in front of them, and 4 huge lips, like walls growing out of the ground, spun and wrapped around Duque. In the gap between the lips, everyone could even see some teeth that weren't too big but were extremely sharp. Obviously, the owner of this wriggling mouthpiece was Sea Thun. The size of this mouthpiece alone was enough for mortals to look up at. The heroes not far away could even clearly smell the stench. Everyone had read Duque's strategy, and everyone knew that the most important part of the strategy was that someone had to be swallowed by Si Thun, but that was disgusting. Chapter 1352. Just in case, Duque activated Ice Barrier in advance. He didn't have the thought of using his delicate skin and tender flesh to resist the sharpness of Si Thun's mouth, which had thousands of sharp teeth. As expected, after entering, Duque felt countless sharp teeth scraping against the ice formed by highly condensed ice elements outside the barrier. Fortunately, it was his senses and not his sense of hearing that came into play. Otherwise, wouldn't the sound of countless claws scraping against glass kill him? Wait a minute. Something's wrong. He had never heard of Si Thun's huge mouth swallowing people with so many teeth. If even a mage like Duque found it hard to deal with, then wouldn't the other unshielded professions be done for? Duque came back to his senses and looked at the system notification. Warning. Warning. You have been swallowed by the descendant of Oro of the Sandworm race. If you do not improve your condition, you may suffer serious damage. F***CK. Did I make a mistake? Duque's face darkened, and he exploded on the spot. Pfft. Do you think I'm Hello Kitty if I don't get angry? A mere descendant of Oro was naturally unable to block the connection between Duque and the magic net. A huge amount of ice elements began to gather in the descendant's body. Saffron. Duque shouted in his soul. Understood, Ice Dragon replied on the spot. The layer of ice in Oro's heir's throat was growing thicker by the second, and in the span of a few breaths, it had turned into a giant block of ice that was firmly lodged in its throat. Then, an incomparably violent draconic aura began to attack its low IQ brain, shaking its rationality. Very easily, this mini-boss went completely berserk. It, who had originally retreated into the ground, jumped out again, ignoring the fierce attacks of the mortal heroes of the allied army, and charged straight ahead. In front of it was its boss, Si Thun. Who would have thought that it would recklessly smash a large bloody hole in the lower part of its own gang leader's incense burner-shaped lower body. It even waved its 6 caliceri below its mouthpart as fast as lightning, trying to drill into it. Traveling through the sand was just an instinctive action for the sandworms of the Oro race. But for Si Thun, it was pain. It should be said that the pain in his heart was greater than the pain in his body. On account that your father, Oro, had sacrificed his life for the country, I was kind enough to let you be my hired thugs, but you actually dare to rebel? It did not matter if Oro's descendant had done it intentionally or not. In any case, it had attacked its master, so it had to die. The newly emerged Si Thun tentacles ignored the attacks of the mortal heroes and viciously attacked Oro's children. Look! Grandpa Si Thun's chrysanthemum sacred claw. Look! Grandpa Thun's love lash. Here. Your first master's dismemberment technique. To Oro's descendant, however, this was nothing short of suffering. The intense pain and frenzy drove this monster to tear at everything it came into contact with. Outsiders could only see that the lower half of Oro's descendant's body was splattered with pieces of internal organs and blood, while the upper half that had burrowed in was spurting out Si Thun's bodily fluids. Was this, the Si Thun clan's love-hate relationship? At this moment, a golden light pierced through Oro's descendant's lower abdomen. In the next instant, Duque appeared in the crowd, his face pale. Even with Duke's so-called demigod-level physique, he felt like vomiting after being shaken so much that he felt like vomiting. Duke suddenly understood why Medivh, as a demigod, had been able to stab him in the chest and kill him with a single stab of his sword. Although a mage-type demigod had the most powerful elemental attack power, while the heavens had bestowed upon Pharaoh such powerful destructive power, they had also very fairly made Pharaoh a very fragile person. Once his magical defenses were broken, his demigod body would at most be comparable to a mortal heroic paladin's body. The term, thick skin, was probably not fated to have anything to do with Duque for the rest of his life. After he came out, he only lost his composure for a moment. Duque immediately became that sage-like demigod with a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Seeing this, Thrall was stunned and couldn't help but cry out. Did he calculate the sandworm's threat to the team and deliberately let himself be swallowed? 30 meters away, Queen Sylvie's ears twitched. On her beautiful face, her facial muscles formed a rather awkward curve. No, you're thinking too much. That guy must have seen wrongly. It was at this moment that Duque suddenly felt that something was wrong. As if he was possessed by a ghost, he turned around. This time, the big mouth that rose up from the ground behind him finally overlapped with the image of the giant mouth tentacle in his memory. However, being swallowed twice in a row wasn't a pleasant experience. For a moment, Duque almost wanted to throw Gavin Rad, who was asking for a beating, into it and let him be swallowed instead. At this moment, Orgrim suddenly said, "Before you, there was a blonde priestess who was swallowed." F***ck. Kalia got shot again. Looking around and seeing that Kalia was indeed nowhere to be seen, Duque jumped in without thinking. In a pitch-black world, the blonde priestess shook her head hard, trying to wake herself up from the dizziness as soon as possible. Almost instinctively, she gave herself a holy word shield. She didn't know how long she had been in a daze. Maybe it was a long time, or maybe it was only 2 or 3 seconds before she remembered what had happened before she fainted. She had been swallowed by the giant mouth tentacle. Even though the mouth of the giant mouth wasn't fast, it was as slow as a turtle in the eyes of a thief. Unfortunately, for a priestess, it was as slow as a snail. As a result, the snail was robbed by the turtle without any suspense. The giant mouth swallowed her in one gulp. When she woke up, she hurriedly struggled to sit up. It was so dark that she couldn't see her fingers in front of her. No matter how many battles the girl had experienced, and how she usually appeared quiet and strong in front of others, some characteristics wouldn't change as she grew up. At this moment, she fumbled around on the ground in a panic, and with great difficulty, she grabbed her staff. Now that she had the staff, she felt a lot more at ease. She quickly cast a cantrip-level spell, Illumination. The situation around her made her feel a little nauseous. The seemingly vast hall was actually Thun's huge stomach, with rough walls squirming all around. She didn't know if it was the stomach wall or something else. Ah! She let out a scream because she was shocked to find that her boots had stepped into something soft. The strong corrosive pain stung her, and the entire epic-ranked boots melted. Oh my god. I've been swallowed, I'll be melted. Thinking of this possible ending, her beautiful face paled. Fortunately, she didn't forget the way Duque had taught her. She almost rolled and crawled towards the nearby high ground. Chapter 1353. The air in Thun's stomach was abnormally foul. Apart from the sour smell of internal organs, there was also the typical smell of rotting corpses. Almost as soon as Duque was swallowed, he opened the system elf scan and shouted, "Kalia. Are you okay? Are you still alive? Kalia, please don't let anything happen to you. If something happens to you, then I'll be a failure as a demigod." Thinking of this, Duque actually felt a little scared to the point that he was about to tremble. Frost elements spread under his feet, giving Duque a relatively safe environment. He looked around, hoping to find Kalia in this damned place that was half submerged in corrosive acid. But he was also afraid of seeing a cold, broken, beautiful corpse. After searching for a while with these conflicting thoughts, the system suddenly notified him that there was a pair of legs on a protruding rock not far away. This discovery almost made Duque die of sadness. But before he could get closer to take a look, he was relieved. It was a pair of night elf leather boots. It must have been some daring elf thief who had sneaked in not long ago and tragically died. Duque took a light breath of the cool air filtered by the ice shield and began to move towards higher ground. Although Kalia's movements were not as nimble as the other women, she had seen the world and experienced great battles. At this time, she should have at least run to the predetermined location. Without even needing to throw a few fireballs, Duque could see in the blurry darkness that there was a high ground in his 9 o'clock direction. If history did not lie to him, that was the only exit. The elements here were already quite chaotic, so he could not use flash. Duque activated his magic and ice shield, moving quickly against the debris falling from above. Soon, he found a human body on the top of a small hill. Duque rushed over and pulled, his hands full of corrosive mucus. If it wasn't for the holy light in her body forming a small protective layer on the surface of her skin, if it wasn't for the thinnest acid here and the extra extreme nature potion protecting her, Kalia might have been a corpse by now. At this moment, Duque looked as if he had found a rare treasure and let out a long sigh of relief. He skillfully controlled the frost elements to melt into a stream of water, gently washing the disheveled yet beautiful female body in front of him. His upper body was exposed to the air, and he just happened to fall on the stone, so he didn't suffer any damage. Her lower body. Ugh, although she wasn't injured, her dress and everything else had been melted and torn. If it wasn't for the strange atmosphere, Duque would have silently praised her in his heart. Using the ice shield to repel the other elements, Duque turned her body over with his left hand and used the holy light to expel the filth from her body. At the same time, he placed his hand on her chest to check if she still had a heartbeat. At the same time, he called out to her urgently, "Kalia. Carly." Halfway through, Duque knew he was in trouble. That's right. There was nothing wrong with a female priest. The blonde was wrong. Your sister's blonde hair. It was obvious that Thun's tentacles were constantly emitting green, purple, and other such lights, causing the vision of others to have a color difference. That's right. That bastard Orgrim was one of the Forsaken. Then what the hell was he looking at? It was obvious that he was looking with the soul fire, so it was all black and white. Well, the main point was that the size and shape of the harmonious thing in his hand was completely wrong. After so many years, how could Duque have gotten the size of Kalia's ball wrong? At this moment, the dignified commander of the Alliance, the true demigod of Azeroth, Duke Marcus's face turned green, and the waterfall of sweat on his back looked like he was about to collapse. Oh my God. Please, don't let her wake up at this time. The silly Duque had forgotten that he himself was someone who had stepped into the realm of gods, and he was fighting against the few true gods of Azeroth. He didn't even believe in himself, so who could save him? Her raised eyebrows moved, and her fair face was already full of crimson. Duque's heart skipped a beat, and he thought to himself, it's over. For a moment, Duque almost wanted to use amnesia magic, physics, on her. Right. Just give her a hard punch in the head. Fainting would be good, and giving her a concussion would be even better. Unfortunately, when Duque saw that gentle and pleasing face that was like that of a girl next door, he couldn't bear to do it no matter what. What he feared the most was that the air suddenly became quiet. The two of them maintained this posture for a full 5 seconds, and then she just woke up. Duque released his claws as if he had been electrocuted. With a sanctimonious expression, he looked like an upright and reliable young gentleman. Sally, you're awake? Are you okay? That's right, Duque made a big mistake. The first to be swallowed was Sally, not his Kalia. Well, the above was all the main point. The main point was that after Sally took the extreme nature potion, her lower body was quite slippery. Thun did a lot of things that slime monsters like to do. Sally's face instantly turned as red as a steamed red prawn. She stammered and said in a low voice, I'm sorry, Sir Marcus. May I ask if you have spare clothes? It would be even better if you have equipment. Yes. While Duque was doing his business, summoning Sapphiron to attack Thun's weak points everywhere, he rummaged through his storage space that was like a doghouse. Why was it all women's equipment like quicksand robe and insight magic robe? Never mind, I'll give Sally a set first. Then Sally half sat, picked it up, and her face turned red. She said in a mosquito-like voice, Excuse me, do you have any other rape? Duque slapped his forehead. It's over. This is a big misunderstanding. These two robes were famous for being sexy in Azeroth. The biggest selling point was the high slit that reached the waist. Now that he didn't rape her, he just asked her to wear any magic robe. Wouldn't he be asking her to go to the battlefield with a gap? Although the upright and reliable young gentleman Dumuk silently praised it in his heart, he always felt that the girl was at a disadvantage. Gritting his teeth, Duque finally took out an indescribable item. At this time, Sally's hand trembled as she took it. Nothing else? Nothing else. Dumuk lowered his head, like a student being scolded by a fierce teacher. Of course not. Originally, it was something that Duque prepared to deceive Jaina and test the flow of magic between different people. Lord. Can you carry it over? Okay. Duque was as obedient as a grandson. Just as there was a rustling sound behind him, the ceiling of this stinky space suddenly opened again, and a figure covered in golden light suddenly fell down. Boss, are you okay? The first half of the sentence was extremely loud, and the person who came was Gavin Rad. Then, the second half of the sentence went astray. Even in this place, you still don't forget about the girl. Okay, as expected of the boss. At this moment, Duque couldn't bear it anymore, amnesia, physical. A 40-meter-long ice sword appeared in Azeroth. Chapter 1354. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? In his dizziness, Gavin Raid naturally thought of the legendary 3 questions of philosophy. Suddenly, a thunderous roar sounded in the turbid air. Gavin Rad, don't just stand there. Attack Thun's stomach wall with all your might. With that, Duque slapped the back of Gavin Rad's head, as if trying to wake him up. But Gavin Rad felt even more dizzy. Boss, why do I feel like you were the one who hit me hard just now? Gavin Rad recalled as he slashed at the stomach wall next to him with the wind sword and added a hammer of wrath. How is that possible? Duque argued. It was you who didn't dodge Thun's tentacle before coming down. There are tentacles in the stomach too. Yes. I just destroyed one. How can we understand the physiological structure of a true god-level monster? Dr. Du said confidently. I've read a lot of books, I won't lie to you. Who was the first to come down? Sally Whitemane. She couldn't take it and left. Duque was telling the truth. In this life, Thun's stomach structure was different from that in the game. It was a very interesting stomach part. It was a thing the size of a stool and looked like a meatball. As long as one gave that thing a hard punch, Thun's stomach would twitch violently and vomit out the person who beat the meatball. I see. Gavin Rad sighed. Don't think too much. The time in the stomach is limited. Go all out. As Duque spoke, he squeezed his magic circuit and released as much magic power as possible, bombarding any tentacle that dared to emerge from Thun's stomach. On the outside, Duque was an awesome demigod. Although Duque could last longer than mortals in Thun's stomach and used an ice shield to resist the corrosion of the natural elements, the magic net was cut off. Duque could only rely on his magic circuit, which was far superior to a Breaking Dawn mage but far inferior to a true god, to produce magic power. Soon, when the Ox-Head Chief Cain fell down, Duque couldn't hold on any longer. He had no choice. He had wasted too much time trying to save Sally. Before Duque left, he left behind a magic orb. As long as it was not destroyed, the ice elements released from it could at least act as a shield and air filter, allowing the people inside to last longer. Blarg. Under the violent attack of the tender flesh, Thun also vomited Duque out. After watching Duque leave, Gavin Rad heaved a heavy sigh and muttered to himself, damn, luckily I was smart enough to pretend to forget. Otherwise, I might have been killed this time. What? Cain turned around abruptly. No. I'm fine. Gavin Rad decided to keep this matter to himself. The incident in his stomach was destined to be an episode that no one would ever mention again. On the other side, Sal was surprised to see Duque bounce out of Thun's incense burner body as if he had jumped out of a stone. Duque, you were just swallowed. No wonder the great chief was shocked. When Duque wasn't around, the songs and dances were still being sung and danced. No, it should be said that under the control of several elemental emissaries, more epic weapons were smashed out. Now, there were almost no small tentacles on the scene, whether it was claws or eyeball tentacles. Basically, as soon as the small tentacles came out, they were instantly killed by the weapons thrown out by the Wheel of Victory system. The mortal heroes were able to focus more on dealing with the giant claws and eyeball tentacles. In theory, the scales of victory should be tilted towards the allied forces. But this was not the case. Because in the outer circle of the battlefield, a terrifying fog of death had accumulated. They couldn't figure out what it was, but they could confirm that it wasn't just pure elemental damage. It was more like a combination of crazy will and some kind of terrifying curse. Nozdormu, who was the most unafraid of death, swept his tail made of sand in. It was fine if his tail suddenly broke midway. At first, the broken tail was like a broken lizard's tail, twisting and jumping on its own. After a few breaths, it turned into a sand monster the size of a minotaur with an unknown number of limbs. A kind of chaotic will and power that had never been seen before forcibly took away Nozdormu's control of the sand, which then mutated and created a new unknown type of monster. These monsters were extremely fierce. They fiercely rushed forward and attacked the Alliance and Horde powerhouses. In just one encounter, 2 of the forgotten powerhouses were directly killed, and even their corpses were devoured. Even a strong person like Orgrim's left arm was broken. Fortunately, the undead didn't feel pain. After using dark healing, he could barely move his left arm. Considering that no one had the energy to disperse such a large-scale, tentatively called poisonous fog, the entire battlefield suddenly became crowded. From the initial radius of a large space of 1,000 meters, it quickly shrank to less than 800 meters. Obviously, the speed of shrinking was still increasing. It could be foreseen that in at most 5 minutes, the 4 dragon aspects would completely lose the space to move. Duque. Do you have any ideas? Alexstrasza shouted to Duque in the dragon's mental network. Our people will hit Thun's stomach. Theoretically, after a certain extent, Thun will fall into a short period of weakness. Then we'll go all out. Okay. But I hope that Onyxia will come too. As soon as the Red Dragon Queen's voice fell, 2 voices of opposition immediately appeared in the network. She's not qualified. She can't do it. The first voice was Maligo's, and the second was Nozdormu's. Obviously, Isra chose to be neutral. Alexstrasza seemed to be in a difficult position. As hardcore members of the Pantheon, the dragons had always fulfilled the duty given to them by the Titans, which was to protect planet Azeroth. They couldn't ignore the disturbance of the ancient gods. However, these ancient gods were existences that even the Titans couldn't deal with back then. In her opinion, the only way to destroy Thun's body and seal it again was to gather the 5 great dragon aspects in the Great Formation. Now that Maligos was holding them back, Onyxia could tell at a glance that she didn't have the will and confidence. Alexstrasza felt a headache coming on. At this time, Duque suddenly said, Onyxia, go. This is for me. Okay. The Black Dragon Princess immediately became decisive. It wasn't an order, not being forced. Duque's words, for me, could make this once cunning Black Dragon become brave. The Red Dragon Queen glanced at Duque with curiosity. Maligos didn't let it go. You'll replenish the insufficient energy? Yes. I'll replenish it. Chapter 1355. This is the dragon race's secret. Maligos' voice in the spiritual network was as firm as stone. I'm only responsible for providing energy. As for how it's used, that's Onyxia's business. That was what Duque said. In fact, for a guy of Duque's level, just from the changes in energy transmission and observing the dragon race's magic array, he could see many things. Not to mention that Duque had a killer weapon, the system elf. Now the dragon race had fallen into a vicious circle. If they wanted to exert the greatest power, they had to use the black dragons who had once betrayed them. Only by joining the Guardians of the Earth could the Pentashade dragon race be considered complete and exert the power of various high-end magic arrays to the extreme. Here came the main point. Ever since Nethario, the Wing of Death, was tempted by the ancient god and Zoth, the entire black dragon race had become the target of corrosion. Even every young dragon that had just hatched from the dragon egg would be affected by the ancient god. Onyxia was the only exception. Although she was also born after the fall of Deathwing, firstly, she was a direct descendant of Nethario, so her vitality and will were stronger. Secondly, she was subdued by Duque when she was on the brink of death at 1% HP. In that extreme situation, even Zoth had given up on her. In the end, Duque picked up a big bargain and got rid of Zotha's will and soul corrosion hidden in her. During Alexstrasza's visit, she had even touched Onyxia herself to confirm this. It could be said that Onyxia was now the only black dragon that the Dragon's Sleeping Temple could ally with, and the only black dragon that was qualified to be allied with. By the way, a certain black dragon prince who was also quite famous in history was still just an egg. Oh, maybe not even an egg. Because Deathwing died early, perhaps the poor guy known as the black-bellied Ratio would no longer have a chance to appear in this life. Speaking of which, since there was no choice, there would not be too much psychological burden. After Alexstrasza promised that if it didn't work, she would turn it into the Four Dragons formation, Malygos finally expressed his acquiescence with silence. After leaving the dragon race's spiritual network, Duque immediately looked at the data in the system prompt. In Thun's stomach, he left not only an ordinary oxygen mask and a natural resistance shield, but also a small surveillance circle. It could monitor the condition of the tentacles in Thun's stomach. In theory, if history didn't trick him, Thun would enter a period of weakness after all the tentacles were knocked out. It was a rare opportunity to focus all their firepower. Any attack that hit Thun's body would cause more than double the damage. The timing was not easy to grasp. First of all, the scene must not be too chaotic. If the scene was too chaotic, it would be easy for a murder case to occur. If they could not even keep their lives, how could they talk about focusing fire? Secondly, it was to pick a time when Thun's previous batch of giant tentacles had been killed and the new giant tentacles had yet to appear. Finally, he had to dodge Thun's ultimate move. Its kinetic death ray could instantly kill anyone it saw. Even Nozdormu, who was known to have the thickest skin, did not dare to take it head-on. Almost at the same second that Duque finished thinking, most people suddenly heard Thun's murmur. "You will die. Your heart is about to explode." This evil god's voice went straight to the heart and almost every mortal hero was in a trance. The warriors and paladins in heavy armor were fine. They were not fast to begin with. For rogues, who were most concerned about speed, this was simply fatal. Just then, a giant eye tentacle broke through the ground and rose from the ground with a crackling sound. As rogues, they needed to find a way to break the giant eye tentacles, eye beam. This kind of chain lightning ray would constantly jump on everyone's body. Every time it jumped, the damage would double. Basically, the third person would die. This state of confusion immediately caused the team to lose members. 3 melee players actually chose the same target. All of this could have been avoided. At most, the moment they discovered it, the 2 furthest would just roll away. However, the ancient god's mental attack directly caused everyone to enter a state of soul paralysis. At that moment, Gavinrad's face turned pale and he immediately activated his invincibility. Vanessa, who was the second to be attacked, immediately activated her shadow cloak. Although she was not immune to the ancient god's damage, it greatly reduced the damage she needed to take. The third one seemed to be a chieftain of the Forsaken. When the highly concentrated eye edge hit him, the people around him were shocked to find that his entire body had turned green. His body, which was no longer decaying because of the shadow power, suddenly turned into a human figure that seemed to be made of green algae. The next second, his entire body scattered on the ground like quicksand. Only the sound of epic-grade equipment clashing against the gravel could be heard. On the other side, Grom was also hit. He, who always fought first in every battle, became the target of the giant claw's tentacles in a brief pause. The huge tentacles wrapped around his entire body, trying to grind him to pieces. This furious attack could be said to have used up all of Grom's strength and courage. At this moment, he was almost standing in the same position as what Oro had said. If the giant claw's tentacles were a few centimeters deeper, Orgrimmar would lose a living legend the next day. Tentacles were soft structures and did not have joints, but because the giant claw's tentacles had a hard claw-like structure, it had joint-like joints. Grom was betting on whether there were strong muscles there. If he did not make the right bet, I've lived enough. Master Howl said to himself in his heart. Living enough did not mean giving up. He used his remaining right hand to grip the handle of the axe tightly, and with a sudden knee strike, he hit the joint of the giant claw. Crack! An armor of Mount Hygel's level was indeed extraordinary. The leg armor violently hit the giant claw's hard shell full of barbs. Fortunately, his knee was not pierced into a sieve because he used the warrior's unique, Fury, attack, which even produced an effect similar to Thunderstrike. This gave him a precious opportunity. Even if it was only for a short moment, Blood Howl perfectly hit the joint of the hard shell on the tentacles. The sharp axe blade easily cut through the thick tentacles as if it was cutting through butter. It was a pity that when he jumped down, he did not pay attention to his feet. Although the heavy boots had thick metal soles, this could not stop a hard claw from piercing through the soles and into the surface of his foot. He felt that the entire sole of his foot was completely pierced, and the pain was so great that he was twitching. Even when he pulled his foot out as fast as he could, Theon's Holy Light Flash was still quickly applied to his head. He still knew that for a long time, he would not be able to use his signature jumping slash. At this moment, he suddenly saw the eyeballs in See Thun's huge purple eyes begin to bulge. Everyone be careful, See Thun is about to use Dark Flash. Chapter 1356. It seemed that See Thun had also realized that fighting the wyverns was too much of a loss, and the combat power of the mortal heroes was unexpected. The mortals that it didn't pay attention to stopped its tentacles from harassing the four dragon aspects. See Thun would definitely change this. More giant claws and tentacles emerged from the ground, and all kinds of tentacles entangled every existence that dared to resist its authority in their own way, regardless of whether they were small or not. Although the situation hadn't exceeded Duque's understanding of See Thun, Duque knew that the so-called strategy could be thrown into the toilet and washed away. The number of tentacles was completely wrong, like King Forest. The most exaggerated thing was that the natural elemental magic in the surrounding air had increased exponentially. In contrast, the three most traditional elements of ice, fire, and arcane magic in the Pharaoh were repelled to the greatest extent. See Thun was crushing all of the Pharaoh, including Malygos and Duque, with his true god-level power. This was its lair, and it was in charge of what kind of place it was. Malygos was furious. This meant that if he wanted to play magic, he would have to downgrade to the Breaking Dawn level. This was absolutely humiliating for him, who claimed to be the only ruler of the magic world. He immediately made a decision to give up the magic he was best at and instead pounced on See Thun, biting and chopping off every tentacle that belonged to See Thun. Not far away, Duque could clearly feel that at this moment, the laws of magic that all mages were familiar with were being forcibly distorted, leaving him in fear. See Thun's chaotic and violent power was descending, and its irresistible power was dominating and taking over everything. Duque could hear the sound of the magic net collapsing in this area. The shattering sound in the soul's vision was even more unsettling and frightening than the earth-shattering roars in reality. Moreover, the magic net was the main part of Duque's main city as a god. The collapse of this part of the magic net was tantamount to cutting off at least 30% of Duque's strength in one go. See Thun was very shrewd. Duque's face fell. A dragon aspect was still a dragon without magic. He was a demigod of magic who had ascended as a human. Could he really transform into the white-robed sword Saint Gandalf and stab him with the spiral sword? In the past, Duke had backstabbed so many strong enemies, and it was always successful, because most of those enemies had something like the heart, a so-called vital point. See, Thun, the monster evil god, didn't have such a thing. The only way to kill it was to forcefully cut off its life force and beat it into a pile of shit. Duke's spiral sword was really not useful here. There was no such thing as an absolutely powerful profession in this world. Since his mystic level was suppressed, Duke had to find another way out. Master? Duke? What should we do? Please give us your instructions. Duke and the other elemental emissaries anxiously asked Duke through the soul connection. They were existences that used the elements as their life forms. If they lost the supply of elemental magic power, not only would their strength be greatly reduced, but they would also face the risk of their souls being annihilated. Duke said, "All of you, return to the weave outside. Inject as much magic power as you can into my body before the weave here collapses. Take care." Alonce's fail seemed to want to persuade Duque, but in the end, he could only say these two words. In the center of his field of vision, the huge eye of Thun was swelling more and more. The system prompt, "A high-energy attack is about to strike," was flashing non-stop. Everyone could see that, Dark Flash, was about to be released. Because there were too many tentacles, the scene was very chaotic. There were still people fighting the most threatening eyeball tentacles, but there were at least 3 more giant claw tentacles with stronger life force near the eye of Thun. The cruel giant claw tentacles twitched instinctively, attacking every living thing that passed by, and hitting something similar to the warrior profession's tendon break. This was a skill with a strong deceleration effect. In front of the world-destroying, Dark Flash, this was undoubtedly the most vicious curse of death. They couldn't run, because they would have to watch helplessly as the crimson light that symbolized death swallowed them up. It wasn't just one person who was hit, but a total of 7. Magni could rely on Avatar, and Theon could use his invincibility to get rid of this damned debuff, but the remaining 5 couldn't escape no matter what. Ox Chief Kane, Grandpa Howl, Hadgeron Brightwing, Benedict, and Thrall. Dark Flash began to shoot. Death rays as thick as the diameter of its eyeballs surged out and hit the ground heavily. Countless insects crawled out of the gravel-filled ground and fled in all directions. Stones of all sizes spun strangely on the ground and danced in fear. Some tiny grains of sand even bounced up from the violent tremors and flew into the air. They first melted into glass under the ultra-high temperature, then turned into terrifying nothingness along with the insects that couldn't escape in time when the crimson destructive rays touched them. Kane's muscles bulged as he roared, trying to use brute force to resist the short-term deceleration effect of tendon break. With a smile on his face, Grom silently took over Magni's position, using his remaining arm to lift the tomahawk and block a giant claw tentacle. However, apart from them, everyone seemed to have accepted their impending fate. No matter what Benedict had in mind, at this moment, he was a benevolent elder, continuing his treatment. After realizing that he had no chance to escape, Hadgeron stopped moving. He stood still and shot arrow after arrow. Thrall didn't act like a great chief at all. Instead, he acted like a pure warrior, madly slashing the tentacles in front of him. That's right. He was an orc first, then a warrior, and finally a great chief. An orc warrior, even if he knew he was going to die, he had to die on the way. No, many tribal masters let out shrill cries, but their feet didn't stop. They could only instinctively follow the established tactics and run around Thun to avoid the invincible power of Dark Flash. They twisted their heads and stared at where Thrall was. For a moment, Woken's heart stopped beating. As Thrall's chief advisor, as a firm supporter of the tribe, Woken never hesitated to use the greatest malice to suspect and speculate on those who were against the tribe or once had a grudge against the tribe. Now, what he was most worried about had happened. In front of him was a great opportunity for the Alliance to weaken the tribe. This was a coalition army formed to fight against the ancient evil gods, and it was also a war where the weak gathered to challenge the strong. If there were any casualties in such a difficult battle, it would be normal. Chapter 1357. The strength of the alliance and the horde was already disproportionate. Wajin couldn't imagine how much cohesion the horde would have if they lost Grom, Kane, and Sal. Maybe the horde would not be destroyed, and maybe there would be new horde heroes to lead the horde. In any case, the decline of the horde would be inevitable. If there was another big incident like the attack of the swarm, maybe the horde would have to join the alliance again. The orcs in the old horde had to wear slave collars because they were defeated. This time, the warriors of the horde might have to wear slave collars themselves because they begged for the reproduction of the race. Perhaps the higher-ups of the alliance would proclaim that this was an amalgamation of the races, or perhaps a wise leader like Duke would play down the past grudges and not wear any humiliating marks on the horde. But to the warriors of the horde, this decision itself was like a slave collar. Suffocation, terror, uneasiness, all kinds of negative emotions surged into Wajin's heart. Heroes could not be replicated. If Duque really had a way to not use it, Wajin didn't dare to imagine it anymore. The first landing point of the Dark Flash was far away from Duque. According to Si Thun's current rhythm of sweeping 180 degrees clockwise in a semicircle, Duque only needed to lift his legs and run 2 steps to reach the safe zone. The shock of the horde's powerhouses fell into Duque's eyes. He didn't say a word and watched this scene coldly. Duque knew that as the biggest core of the alliance's formation, his every move would be a signal. It could even be said that if he ordered to clean up the horde first, except for a few upright people like Tyrion Fordring, most of the alliance's powerhouses would be happy to immediately turn around and eliminate the unstable factor of the horde first. Even if the alliance and the horde had cooperated for the 3rd time in the Battle of Calamity, Mount Hyjal, and the Battle of the Swarm, presumably no one would forget the hatred between the alliance and the horde. Even if it was a tragedy caused by drinking demon blood by mistake and maliciously led by people with ill intentions, having a reason to forgive did not mean that it would definitely be forgiven. However, at this moment, Duque had a feeling of being in a trance. It was the feeling of standing at the crossroads of history and controlling fate. There had never been such a clear feeling of one person controlling the fate of millions of people from the 2 major forces, or even all the living beings on planet Azeroth. Perhaps it would be more beneficial for the Alliance to let Sal die here and let the tribe become a pile of loose sand. The alliance that had swallowed up the horde might be even more focused on fighting against the Burning Legion and the ancient gods. Perhaps this was what Duque, as a human, should do. However, at this time, Duque felt that it was pointless to do so. Wasn't the world of Azeroth exciting precisely because of the war epics written by heroes? Wasn't it precisely because of the strategy of inclusiveness that there were hundreds of races gathered together, regardless of race, occupation, age, or gender? What if he did? Wouldn't that be going against the flow of the world? Duque suddenly laughed because he suddenly remembered his original identity, an insignificant citizen of the Celestial Empire. Since such a large celestial empire could be inclusive of 56 races, why couldn't the leader of a small alliance with only tens of millions of people do the same? Duque walked towards the safe zone according to the prearranged tactics. For some reason, in the eyes of others, Duque did not take a step back. The power of fairness and love nurtured in Duque's heart seemed to erupt at this moment, forming a towering flag in the illusory spiritual world. Duque made his move. Even though his strength had temporarily fallen to the Breaking Dawn level because of Si Thun's forceful removal of the weave and other elements, he was still a well-deserved expert here. A longbow made of pure holy light suddenly appeared in his hand. Queen Sylvanas looked at it in surprise because the shape of this bow was the bow she and Duque had used to shoot arrows together when the cataclysm invaded the Well of the Sun. The slender and sharp spiral sword turned into the sharpest arrow and was knocked on the bowstring. Every move of Duque's was very fast, but every ranger, including Queen Sylvanas, felt very awkward when they saw it. After all, Duque did not know how to shoot arrows. He was purely copying Queen Sylvanas' posture when she shot the arrow that day purely from memory. Although it was elegant and efficient for a female elf to use such a posture, if it was a rough man, it would be a little too horrible to look at. The posture was not the main point. The main point was that Duque could actually forcibly grasp the knack of archery through imitation. The bowstring vibrated. The next moment, an arrow suddenly appeared beside the giant claw that Grom and Sar were fighting with. The golden arrow perfectly pierced through the gap in the shell of the giant claw. The golden arrow tore through flesh and blood, and the stinky liquid split the black void like a line, and then turned into a bloody mist. After the golden spiral arrow, or rather, the spiral sword, shot through the huge tentacle, before the terrifying light of dark flash touched it, it made the smallest 180-degree turn in the air. Then, under the guidance of Duque's power, it flew back along the periphery of Thun's body in an arc. The 5 trapped people couldn't help but have a thought: when did the Alliance have a god of archery? Before they could think too much, Queen Sylvanas had personally demonstrated and shot the second arrow. This time, Queen Sylvanas had used all her strength to shoot the arrow, aiming at it. Originally, Queen Sylvanas' attack alone was not enough. At the critical moment, a claw popped out from the Emerald Dream and fiercely added another hit. The giant claw that wrapped around Cain fell 1 second later. Go! Duque's stern voice came from afar. You make it sound so easy. Grom complained, which was rare for him. That's right. How to go? The 5 of them still had at least 3 seconds of broken tendon, but Thun's ultimate skill only needed 1 second at most. At this moment, they were pleasantly surprised to find that the ground under their feet had turned into ice. The next moment, the ice suddenly bounced up obliquely. They were like marbles bounced off a spring, and their whole bodies flew out of the safe zone. The powerhouses on both sides caught the 5 who were bounced off. Hadgeron! Queen Sylvanas shouted. Great Chief! Woken was extremely surprised. Duque's action showed his attitude. Not only would he not give up Hadgeron and Benedettas, the 2 seemingly second-tier heroes in the Alliance, but he even intended to save Sar, the 3 core figures of the Horde. Not only the Alliance, but even the powerhouses of the Horde felt the power of Duque's will. Magni, who passed by Duque, sighed slightly. His nose actually felt sour. Chapter 1358. This was the faith that mortals had towards the light. The young man named Duque, his country, and his companions had unknowingly surpassed Thoradin the Great, who had been revered as a saint for 2,800 years because he had teamed up with the High Elves to expel the Trolls. He had walked to the forefront of the era. Magni sighed. If the many living beings in Azeroth could survive, perhaps the name Duke Marcus would become an eternal legend. William happened to be running near Magni, and suddenly asked, Uncle Magni, can I really become a great leader like Uncle Marcus in the future? Magni laughed. In his god's descent state, he ran with big strides and laughed heartily. Silly boy. There is only one Duke Marcus, and there is only one William Wrynn. Moreover, mortals are mortals, and gods are gods. Before you have the ability to step into the divine realm, why do you care so much? You're just asking for trouble. William was stunned. Suddenly, the confusion that had been stuck in his heart for a long time was solved. Yes, every existence in the world was unique. No one would be a degraded copy of another. William was William. As long as he did his best and had a clear conscience, it would be fine. Moreover, if the gap was too big, he would lose the heart to catch up. Mortals were destined to look up to the divine realm. On the other side, Thrall, who had been saved, looked at Duque with an incomparably complicated expression. Logically speaking, he should hate Duque. It was precisely because of this man's incomparably outstanding and even era-transcending wisdom that led to the defeat of the old tribe and caused hundreds of thousands of orcs to become slaves. He, who hadn't personally participated in the Battle of the Dark Portal and World War II, could shout, "Orcs will never be slaves," without hesitation. This heroic statement might be praised by the tribe for thousands of years, but he couldn't say half a sentence like, "Duque, I hate you." Resentment? Perhaps. But at this moment, there was more admiration. While running, Thrall's mouth that was full of fangs squirmed for a long time before he asked, "Why? Do you think it's because we are true allies? Did we swear to protect each other? Or do you mean that I'm a good person, a great saint?" Duque smiled. Neither. Thrall suddenly gritted his teeth. Orgrim told me. You had personally ordered assassins to assassinate me when I was still a baby. He's just a weak baby. For a moment, the experts on both sides almost suspected that Sal was going to fight with Duque. Duque's tone changed, and his words became sonorous. I never intended to deny it. At that time, a completely destroyed tribe was more beneficial to the Alliance. If I was in power at that time, I would have slaughtered all the captives of the tribe, just like how the tribe slaughtered all the civilians in every human village in the Elven Forest. The air suddenly froze. Sal did not know how to continue. At this moment, Duque's facial muscles suddenly softened. But that's all in the past. The current relationship between the Alliance and the Horde had nothing to do with justice, pity, or hatred. Allies? The benevolence of a saint? Sorry, of course I won't say such superficial words. If you have to ask me for an answer, I will tell you that this is the need of the world. The need of the world. Sal was a little confused. Don't worry. If I choose to attack the Horde one day, it will be because the conflict between the Alliance and the Horde cannot be reconciled, and I will do it at least 3 days after the Horde receives the official declaration of war. Perhaps one day in the future, I will kill you, and perhaps you will kill me. In this world where even the Titans, who are known as gods, can fall, nothing is immortal. Duque's words were shocking. Not only Sal, but all the experts of the Alliance and the Horde around him lost the ability to speak. Please remember. You and I may fight each other and die a violent death. The forces you and I represent may tear up the Alliance and become enemies. But, not today. Yes, not yesterday. Maybe tomorrow. But not today. Not today. This sentence itself contained a mysterious attitude. An attitude that could make both sides feel relieved. Maybe tomorrow they would become mortal enemies again, but not today. Maybe tomorrow they would perish, but not today. There might be a lot of bad luck and misfortune in the future, but definitely not today. Today was destined to be a memorable day for mortals. Because today would be a great victory day for mortals and demigods. Because today would be the day of victory for the allied forces of many races to overthrow the dark ancient evil god Thun. Sarl laughed loudly and waved the burning hammer of destruction. Ha ha ha. Duke Marcus. I admire you, let's go together. Kill this disgusting guy. Duque also smiled and waved the spinning golden sword in his hand, haha. Sal, I also admire you, and I used to want to kill you. But not only Sal and Duque, but even the experts of the Alliance and the Horde who heard the conversation between the two big shots shouted in unison. Not today, when Thun's dark flash drew a 180-degree arc and stopped helplessly without any success, the experts of the Alliance and the Horde burst out with the greatest enthusiasm and combat power, bravely pouncing on their targets. The space that could be moved around shrank once again. The 4 dragon aspects and a slightly smaller black dragon, with Thun as the center, occupied an average of 5 directions. Duque's words were also heard by the 4 dragon aspects. Alexstrasza and Isera nodded at Duque. They agreed with his words. Nozdorma was deep in thought, only Malygos was still unhappy. Perhaps in the future, it will be difficult for so many dragon aspects to gather together to deal with the ultimate evil. Regardless of whether we have conflicts with each other, I still want to say, not today. Yes, today was a day to work together. Tomorrow's conflicts would be dealt with tomorrow. Malygos spat fiercely and finally nodded at Alexstrasza. Every battlefield in the hall was ignored by the dragons and Duque, and all the tentacles were left to the mortals to deal with. Only the heads of the dragons were left. The dragon's head was ferocious and uneven, the dragon's eyes emitted a blazing light, and the fangs that were slightly exposed were glowing fiercely. The entire dragon's mental network was dead silent, as if the world had come to a standstill at this moment. It made others hallucinate, as if these huge dragons were just sculptures or decorations. All the distracting thoughts eventually returned to nothingness, and the soft breathing sound of the dragons spread like ripples. Unknowingly, every dragon's breath came together. The same frequency, the same weight. Chapter 1359. A bolt of lightning zigzagged across the dark hemispherical space, and the dark void suddenly boiled like porridge. A five-colored spot of light suddenly appeared 100 meters above the eye of Si Thun. Like a falling stone hitting the mirror-like surface of a lake, a circle of ripples appeared in the air, and the five-colored circle spread out to a radius of at least 500 meters. Even the poisonous circle summoned by Si Thun was forced to retreat. A soft, woo-woo sound was heard. This is... Kalia's voice was a little cautious. I know. It's the Dragon Clan's formation, right? Jaina was a little excited as she watched this scene happen. Every powerhouse in the fierce battle noticed the changes above their heads. Their movements were a little distorted due to excitement, and most of them took the time to look up, but they had to retract their gaze and focus on the battle. Not everyone had the spare time to appreciate the huge shadow that gradually emerged from the five-colored circle of light. It was a majestic palace. It was silver-white, inlaid with gold-edged carvings everywhere, with complex and thick Greek-style columns, and a holy palace covered with snow. However, this temple was upside down. It was as if it formed a mirror image of Si Thun on the ground. When everyone saw the towering temple gradually transforming from a shadow to reality, and saw those translucent illusory ancient dragons wandering around the inverted temple, they finally realized what kind of palace it was. It's the Dragon Slumber Temple. The dragon aspect actually summoned the Dragon Slumber Temple. The sudden appearance of the strange temple finally affected the entire battlefield, and even Si Thun could not help but turn his huge eyes to stare at the uninvited guest that suddenly broke in from midair. More and more colors of light flickered in the dark void, like the light of stars, twinkling. Every time a five-colored light flashed, a mighty and majestic dragon with shining scales was left behind. Red dragon, blue dragon, green dragon, bronze dragon, and even the legendary black dragon that had left the Dragon Slumber Temple. These illusory dragon projections pushed aside Si Thun's poisonous fog and completely spread out over the dark hemispherical space with a radius of 1,000 meters. After the light flickered, a vast sea of dragons appeared in the sky. Every dragon was glowing with holy light. It even seemed like a titan in the pantheon was standing at a higher place among the dragons, looking at the twisted and hideous Si Thun with a majestic gaze. The battlefield was silent for a moment. In the next moment, a clear and melodious dragon roar resounded throughout this dark underground world. In the north, the Red Dragon Queen raised her head high and spoke in Draconic. In the name of the Titans of the Pantheon, I, Alexstrasza, swear to lead the Red Dragon race to protect the purity of life on planet Azeroth. The alarm in Si Thun's heart rang. In just a moment of daze, it discovered that it had lost control of part of the corrosive evil divine power around it. His connection with the divine powers had been severed. Originally, he relied on the corrosion star soul to forcefully extract the life force of the planet, allowing him to become an existence that even the Pantheon Hall couldn't deal with. At this moment, it found that its control area in the crust was invaded by a ball of green flames. It was clearly like a ball of raging flames, but it allowed the underground space that had been exhausted due to its excessive extraction of power to show life again. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The entire depths of the crust swayed gently. Then, Malygos, Nozdormu, and Isra made their oaths one after another. Under the witness of the sleeping dragon temple, each oath would deepen the bond between the dragon aspect and the planet, making it stronger and more able to evoke the resonance of the will of planet Azeroth. It could be said that the Guardian Oath was the source of the dragon aspect's power. Malygos mobilized the elements of this world. Nozdormu consolidated the time and space lines of the planet. Isra eliminated the evil dreams, wills, as much as possible. Under the witness of the sleeping dragon temple, each oath would deepen the bond between the dragon aspect and the planet, making it stronger and more able to evoke the resonance of the will of planet Azeroth. It could be said that the Guardian Oath was the source of the dragon aspect's power. At this time, it was Onyxia's turn. If she had a choice, Alexstrasza did not want to put this weak-willed junior last. That was because the pressure on her was the greatest at the beginning and the end. It couldn't be helped. The will of the planet started with living beings and ended with the Earth as the carrier. Who asked the original Nesario to be so powerful? The father had fallen, and the daughter had turned from a traitor to a loyal subject. How strong could her will be? There was no way to fake it in front of the will of the planet, so Onyxia's oath sounded very spineless. In the name of the prophet of my lord's fate, the demigod of the Azeroth weave, Duke Marcus, I, Onyxia, am a dragon that obeys the will of my lord. In accordance with the guardian will of my lord, I will protect the land of Azeroth. Weak. Very weak. You're so weak, aren't you? She did not have her own will at all. Even in her declaration, she only claimed that she was a pure thug. What she meant was, I'm just a worker. Don't look for me if there's nothing important. Even if the sky falls, my lord will hold it up. Alexstrasza and Isera rolled their eyes when they heard this. The other two didn't look happy. Nozdormu bared his teeth, and Maligos spat, pfft. Onyxia ignored them all and pretended not to hear. Anyway, protecting the world has nothing to do with me. I'm just a slacker. I'm forced to be a mount because I want to live. I'm being ridden day and night because I want to live. If the side of justice is the victor, I don't mind being the messenger of justice. Her oath was weak, so the response given by the will of the planet was naturally weak. It was on a completely different level from the previous 4 dragon aspects. If Duque had not held the line at the end, the Red Dragon Queen would probably have announced the change to the 4-dragon formation. Duque stood at the junction of Onyxia's neck and back. His feet seemed to have grown roots as he stood firmly on the shiny black dragon scales. The cloak behind him fluttered even though there was no wind. His tiger lips moved slightly, and a clear voice sounded. I, Duke Marcus, hereby swear, I don't care who you are, and I don't care what you want to do. Whether it's the Supreme Demon King or the evil ancient god that has taken root on the planet. Since you're in Azeroth, you have to listen to the rules of Azeroth. Or else, or get lost. Or die. The simple and violent oath caused the shadows of the entire dragon's slumber temple to buzz. Then the oath became an echo, circulating again and again in the vibration of the laws, becoming louder and louder. First, it resounded through the entire Ankh-Kiraj temple, then Silithus, and finally it seemed to shake through the entire planet of Azeroth. Chapter 1360. Critically ill patients squeezed out abscesses, cut off flesh, and even severed limbs in order to find a chance of survival. It was like a patient with advanced diabetes who knew that his leg had rotted, but was still unwilling to amputate it. This kind of decision was never an easy thing to make. Ever since the ancient gods corroded planet Azeroth, absorbing nutrients at the cost of the planet's destruction in exchange for their own growth, this beautiful planet seemed to have fallen into an endless cycle. If the planet wanted to be healthy, these ancient gods had to be removed. However, removing the ancient gods also meant that planet Azeroth, which had been deeply corroded by the souls and power of the ancient gods, had a high chance of being destroyed. Even Amon Thul, the boss of the Pantheon, could not make the decision to completely destroy the ancient gods. In the end, he used sealing methods to seal the ancient gods, praying that as time passed, there would be a better way to deal with it. The reason why Duque dared to confront Si Thun so head-on was because he had provided the planet's will with a solution. When Alexstrasza's life force was injected into Si Thun's territory in the planet's crust, Si Thun was completely enraged. The ancient gods had been fighting for territory since tens of thousands of years ago, when there were no historical records, until they were sealed during the War of Domination 25,000 years ago. On the land, on the only continent of ancient Kalimdor, the various proxy races were fighting each other. In the depths of the earth, the forces of each other were constantly clashing. Alexstrasza, with her mere demigod body, rushed in with that little power, and purified the entire territory of Si Thun, bringing vitality to such a vast area. This was as ridiculous as using a drop of water to purify a large bottle of ink. Si Thun was really angry. The turbid and evil underground world was like a triggered trap, operating rapidly. From the layers of seemingly ordinary rock formations. From the quiet and peaceful underground river. From the unexpected cracks and holes. Countless forces were used, finally forming an unimaginably huge mass of polymer. If Alexstrasza's power was a pool of pure water, then the huge figure of the evil divine power that gradually emerged was a deep pool that could not be purified. In the crust, there was an incredible landscape everywhere. The infinitely distorted evil will and corrosive slurry constantly mutated in the huge underground space, forming a chaotic landscape of eternal change. It frantically surrounded and suppressed the wisp of green that dared to shoot into the underground world, destroying the only life aura that dared to invade the underground world in the past 25,000 years. Compared to the monster under the Kiraj temple, which was called Sea Thun by the Kiraj insect people in the insect people language, what the mortal warriors of the Alliance and the Horde saw now was just the tip of the iceberg. At that very moment, in a place deeper than the Earth's crust, in the deepest depths of the Earth, some life seemed to have been awakened. Not only Sea Thun's mind and divine power amalgamated in the Earth's crust, but even the coalition soldiers far away on the surface clearly felt a chilling anger gushing from the deepest part of the Earth. This is... Alexstrasza was stunned. At first, she didn't understand why Duque wanted her to send 30% of her power into Sea Thun's nest. Now she understood a little. Lava. The magma was hot enough to destroy everything. Every living planet had its own active liquid core, a large part of which was magma. With the movement of the Earth's crust, the planet would always vent the excess energy deep in the Earth's core in the form of volcanic eruptions from time to time. In Azeroth, the most typical place was the Goro crater. It happened to be the intersection of the two continental plates. What Duque did was actually to remind the hazy will of the planet that it could make its own eruptions slightly deviate, yes. While Alexstrasza was luring Sea Thun's power together, she could directly spew magma from the depths of the Earth's core and annihilate Sea Thun's main force. Now it seemed that this idea was successful. Sea Thun's simple thinking allowed Alexstrasza, with her mere demigod power, to complete a feat similar to using a fishing rod to lift a whale. Hundreds of millions of tons of lava sprayed at high speed onto Sea Thun's divine power polymer in the Earth's crust, and Sea Thun in the Kiraj temple suddenly let out a shrill cry. With this as a signal, Theon, who was in his stomach, raised Ashbringer high up and slashed down with all his strength. In the eyes of every hero who was fighting fiercely, Sea Thun's body expanded by at least half its size, lightning flashed in its body, and every eyeball tentacle that squeezed out of the ground randomly released lightning similar to eye edge. Its huge and hideous and twisted body became astonishingly bright, giving off a strange sense of transparency. At the same time, it gave people a premonition that it would collapse at any time. An ancient god was indeed an ancient god. Sea Thun was indeed a super boss that destroyed countless guilds in the early versions of World of Warcraft. Even though the largest group of divine power in its nest continued to be destroyed, in a situation that was almost equivalent to a human's heart being pierced, it still didn't die immediately. Instead, its ferocity was aroused. A huge tentacle that was twice the size of an ordinary giant claw tentacle drilled out of the ground and fiercely swept its claws at the place where the mortal heroes were the most concentrated. Just lying on the ground, the tentacle was nearly 2 stories high, and it swept over with the momentum that could sweep an entire street with one blow. Such a wide area of indiscriminate attack made all dodging meaningless. The plate armor with higher defense showed its true value at this moment. The paladins and warriors wearing heavy iron cans could at least be hit like flying balls. An undead thief was smashed into pieces the moment it was hit. The other lich's blue and white ice barrier had just lit up when, in the next instant, the high-density ice elemental barrier couldn't withstand the powerful attack, and the entire ice block exploded with a blazing white light before shattering with a loud bang. Not only the ice block, but the entire body of the lich along with the ice block shattered into powder-like small pieces, annihilated in this dark underground space. But this was the last victim of the Battle of the Kiraj temple. It was at this moment that the earth suddenly shook. Apart from Duque and the will of planet Azeroth, no other existence discovered that after the underground magma destroyed the largest mass of divine power of sea Thun, it once again gathered in a whirlpool in one direction. In the center of the whirlpool, after the dark red light had accumulated to the extreme, it suddenly lit up and burst out with a brilliance that was no less than the sun's rays. With a loud boom, a fiery red pillar of light burst out from the ground where sea Thun's base was located. This lava spike was like a red-hot fork, piercing sea Thun from the bottom up in the blink of an eye. It was like a kebab with a piece of meat on it, held high. Without even half a second of hesitation, the 5-color guardian dragons activated the dragon's slumber formation, and the illusory dragons injected their own dragon breath into the inverted dragon's slumber temple. A brilliant 5-colored brilliance suddenly rose from the temple, and from top to bottom, it blasted into sea Thun's big eyeball. It was an amazing scene that countless mortals would never have the opportunity to see in their lifetime. The dazzling brilliance in the underground cave radiated in all directions, not only dispelling the surrounding darkness, but the brilliance was also like the dawn, washing away the darkness. Even the light penetrated through the thick rock layers, bathing the entire Silithus desert in this light. Hundreds of thousands of coalition soldiers were fortunate enough to witness the last moments of a true evil god. The remains of sea Thun, which had been rushed into the air by the lava fountain, welcomed the final blow of Elun, the goddess of the moon. A burst of starlight and moonlight flashed. Immediately, the entire disgusting mass of meat began to fall apart like a sandcastle blown away by a gust of wind. Then, in the blink of an eye, an immeasurable amount of power of heaven and earth broke out of sea Thun's body, even tearing his body into pieces, turning it into a bloody mist that filled the sky, dissipating in the almost never-ending desert storm of Silithus. Chapter 1361. I, Duke Marcus, in my capacity as the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, declare, Sal, in my capacity as the Chief of the Horde, declare, 2 voices, in different languages, simultaneously synchronized in every magic communication channel and broadcast on every magic loudspeaker. The cruel ancient evil god sea Thun has been defeated by the combined forces of the dragons, the Alliance, and the Horde. The moment the 2 broadcasts stopped, there was a very brief silence, as if a god had come and zipped everyone's mouth, forbidding them from speaking. After a short pause, the gears of time began to turn again. In a flash, loud cheers erupted in every corner of Silithus at the same time. In the emotionless desert, it seemed that every grain of sand was instantly heated up by the enthusiasm of the people, and even the air was boiling. Ha 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 ha. Dead. Dead? Who asked you to show off? What ancient god? To hell with it. Bah! Bastard, can you see it in heaven? I, your father, have avenged you. Who was laughing and celebrating? Who was crying sadly? The news of sea Thun's annihilation spread throughout Silithus in the shortest amount of time, as if it had grown wings. Then, through magic, it spread to Theramore and Orgrimmar, which were thousands of miles away. It crossed the endless sea and reached the Eastern Kingdom. Hundreds of thousands of allied soldiers shouted wildly, their tears and smiles mixed together, but it did not seem out of place at all. The Tauren carried the gnome on his neck as if it was a normal thing. Orcs and humans put their arms around each other's shoulders, trolls and dwarves looked at each other and danced. All the incredible things before the war happened at this moment. When Duque announced that the war was over and that hundreds of tons of wine would be shipped, the atmosphere reached its peak. Duque had long foreseen the fall of sea Thun, and under the premise of meeting the military needs, he secretly prepared a celebration ceremony. When hundreds of portals opened at the various gathering points of Silithus soldiers, when the tavern attendants were transferred over to push barrels of fine wine through the portals and open the barrels, letting the overflowing aroma of wine spread in all directions, not a single warrior could control himself. Don't push. Don't push. Line up. Even the Alliance tribe has a share. With the Holy Knights maintaining order and millions of gold coins opening the way, Thrall, who saw this scene in the magic mirror, was shocked by Duque's generosity. The scorching lava was erupting more than 10 steps away, but under the cover of the large ice base that Duque had constructed with the frost element, not a single bit of heat was transmitted to him. Instead, there was a faint chill, giving off a surreal feeling. Sal turned his head. Duque, did you foresee Thun's fall long ago? Duque pursed his lips. No. However, I think that at least if we fail and have to wait for death, we can still drink away our sorrows. Humph. I don't believe a single word you're saying now. Duque shrugged. Whether you believe it or not, I believe it myself. He had seen scoundrels before, but he had never seen such a scoundrel. Sal suddenly realized that his cultivation was not enough. Sal scratched his head and was about to say something when Watkins stopped him. As a great chief, once the battle was over, there would be a lot of things to do. At this time, Jaina came over, pulled on Duque's sleeve, and said in a voice that sounded like a dream, "Hey, Duque, is Thun dead?" Duque raised his head, then twisted his slightly sore neck. Since the beginning of human civilization, we have always wanted to kill all the rats and cockroaches, but what happened? Jaina's face suddenly turned a little ugly. This result is terrible. Duque, however, shook his head and smiled. You missed a lot of things. From the point of view of the continuation of life, no existence can completely destroy a divine creature that can reproduce infinitely. Then, from the point of view of the gods, although Thun is not completely finished, it has completely lost its territory and foundation. In all senses, it is no different from being finished. It has already been eliminated from this multi-party game around planet Azeroth. Forget about reviving and coming back, it's still unknown whether the other ancient gods will let it go. Zoth, Yogg-Saron, and the others were not good people. In the eyes of mortals, the defeated Thun had no value other than contributing equipment. In the eyes of the other ancient gods, Thun's remaining chaos divinity and divine spark fragments were the greatest treasure trove. Unfortunately, those things were also toxic to Duque, so he could only let those guys take advantage of them. As the greatest reflection of a god's characteristics, divinity had the deepest level of the god's will imprint, and was definitely the most troublesome. Although Duque could purify those divinities, it was extremely not cost-effective. This was like extracting beneficial substances from a pile of feces. In theory, there were drops, but who would be willing to extract them? How much effort and energy would be wasted? This was a big problem in itself. As for the divine spark fragment, this thing was the upper limit of divine power that a god could contain. In theory, it was also a good thing, but Duque still politely declined it. Because the direction Thun was going was not in line with Duque's. A small corrosive element in Logia? What the hell was that? Duque did not need those things. What Duque really wanted was, suddenly, in the underground space that had been blown open, everyone felt an inexplicable throbbing. Whether it was the mortal heroes or the guardian dragons that were supposed to be high and mighty, they all raised their heads one by one. Suddenly, they felt that they had temporarily lost contact with the power that they were familiar with. What was reflected in their vision was a still world. The wind was still, and every grain of dust that was blown by the wind was still in a spinning position. There was neither the agitation of the elements, nor the passage of time. They watched the faint light of the sun pouring down from the hole in the dome, and it was a warm scene. The sudden sense of loss after losing their powers did not bring them panic. The biggest reason was that a sense of tranquility and warmth filled their hearts. That was, the feeling of a mother. The next moment, time seemed to flow again. Everything in the world seemed to be in high spirits because of the arrival of a will. To be precise, it was not a single will. It was more like an amalgamation of countless wills. Some were living, some were determined to be dead by mortals, and there were also many wills of wandering souls. All the wills gathered together, forming a relatively unified will. At this moment, this will set a sentence in the common language, "Thank you, Duke Marcus." Then, this will disappeared without a trace. Phew. Duque let out a long turbid breath. This is what I wanted. Chapter 1362. What kind of existence was a planet's will, or commonly known as a star's soul? This was a very general topic, and no one could explain it clearly. Duque had read countless ancient books in Karazhan, but there were not many records about the planet's will. Obviously, it was not the only case that planet Azeroth had a will. In some cases, the planet only had a very vague concept of survival. However, Duque noticed that there were traces of a star's soul on a planet that Medivh had personally set foot on. Unfortunately, that star's soul had been defeated and perished in the face of the Burning Legion's invasion. The most crucial part of this record was that at the last moment, the star's soul had fought for survival, or perhaps it was for the most thorough resistance. It did something that seemed exaggerated, but Duque felt was reasonable. The star's soul had bet everything on a mortal hero. That guy was like a lottery jackpot, obtaining a full set of luxurious equipment, including 3 middle-grade artifacts, in just a week. Then, that guy became the Otherworld's version of Long Outyen, forming an army of 1 million people in a month to fight against the Burning Legion. Unfortunately, it was unknown whether the star's soul itself was too weak, or that the Otherworld's Long Outyen was not talented enough. Anyway, after that guy killed 2 high-level Void Lords in one go, Archimonde directly attacked and smashed him into pieces. A vigorous war of resistance also ended with the victory of evil. Planet Azeroth was valued by the Pantheon, and there was definitely a reason why the Titan boss Amon Thul did not hesitate to let those blind ancient gods go to protect planet Azeroth. Perhaps, if Duque had transmigrated a little later, he would have known about this history in the later versions of the game. The problem was that there were no ifs in this world. One day, Duque's brain would run out of information about transmigrators. Then, when faced with an unknown fate, the best choice was to strengthen himself. Duque did not know if the planet's will would reward him for helping planet Azeroth kill Thun, or how much it would give him. At the very least, it would be good to have a good impression of the planet's will. What if it gets excited or anxious and wants to find some demigod hero to pass on his peerless skills to me, Duque? I don't mind being Du Outyen. Of course, as a transmigrator and a newly advanced demigod with a brain, Duque would never put all his eggs in one basket. If it really did turn over, it would be a complete loss. There was no need to deliberately curry favor with the will of planet Azeroth. It would be good if there were benefits, but there was nothing to complain about if there were no benefits. After all, the path of the gods was basically a dark path. Thun and the other ancient gods were so powerful, but didn't they still fall, get sealed, and get beaten up? The seemingly omnipotent titans of the Pantheon Palace who claimed to be eternal were also killed to the point where not even their seeds were left. In the original history, the mortal heroes of Azeroth had a final battle with the resurrected Sargeras. It could be foreseen that the resurrected Sargeras would have an almost invincible divine power. This Sargeras would even be at his peak. Blindly focusing on the path of the titans of the Pantheon Palace would not be able to defeat such a Sargeras. Duque pondered for a long time before he figured out a truth. Now, the various powers that the mortal heroes of Azeroth had mastered, such as the anger of the warriors, the energy of the thieves, and the magic of the pharaoh. From another perspective, this was also a microcosm of the laws and territories mastered by the higher-level masters. Perhaps, the two of them had always been one. Taking the Burning Legion as an example, they basically deduced the power of shadow and fire from dark energy. On this basis, the Eridar warlocks appeared, and then there were the so-called Death Knights and Demon Hunters and other branches. If one used the weak and one-sided power system mastered by mortals to work backwards, they might eventually be able to trace back to the origin of the power of this universe. From Duque's point of view, this was the most reliable and practical path to the pinnacle of power. This path seemed to take the longest detour, but it was the most dependable, and one would not be fooled by the so-called predecessors. It was a pity that the way to embark on this path was to keep trying. Just like the scientists before he transmigrated, they would constantly face failure in almost endless attempts, and then learn from each setback, constantly perfecting themselves, and finally open the door to the pinnacle of power in the universe. To find such a key in this vast universe was not a chore that could be described with the word difficult. To be honest, even Duque himself was not confident that he would succeed. But he could already predict what the future would be like. Either he could directly surpass the limits of the world, dismantle the distorted void, and beat up Sargeras. Or, actually, the upper limit of the power system of Azeroth was very high. Even if it did not work out, he could go with the flow and convince Xing Hun to release the upper limit of power in advance, and nurture a large number of demigods in advance. At that time, a large number of demigods would be wearing full sets of divine equipment. That glorious orange light, even if they could not fight, could frighten the Burning Legion's Void Lords to the point that they could not take care of themselves. But if he were to take this path, many would still have to train. At this moment, after confirming the fall of Thun, the 4 dragon aspects, led by Alexstrasza, turned into human forms and walked over. The red dragon queen circled one hand around Duque's neck, and without a care in the world, she stuck Duque under her armpit. Oh, Duque boy, we really look at you in a different light. I didn't expect you to be able to support the Wormrest Matrix through Onyxia, and even communicate with the will of the planet. Hee. Actually, the Wormrest Temple has a dragonification spell, are you interested? Get lost. I'm doing well as a magic demigod for humans and elves, I'm not going to be your subordinate. And that thing can at most turn a human into a half-dragon, right? It's useless. No. It's very useful, at least I can see you with a tail growing out of your butt. Damn, what kind of bad taste was this? Alright. Seeing that Alexstrasza had used the dragon's peak to stare at his face, he felt quite good, so a gentleman like Duque decided to bear with it. Thank you again, Duque. Isra came up and politely bowed to Duque. You're welcome. If you could control the more radical druids, I would be very grateful. Duque glanced at Fandral Staghelm, who had been acting like a bystander throughout the entire process. Since Tyrande was unwilling to attack this fellow, Duque could not directly attack him. But Duque was quite willing to give Fandral some trouble. I will. Although Isra did not quite understand, he still agreed.